Chair roles are now live.
Okay, we are waiting for Eileen, who's getting something, and then we will begin. So everyone watching us live, we will have just a brief wait before we can start. Please bear with us. I should have some kind of annoying music play, don't you think, while we're waiting? I got it.
Maybe you could just sing for us.
I doubt that. I could start reading the Elmhurst zoning ordinances. Wouldn't that be appropriate at this point? But no, here is Eileen. So we will, I will now call to order the meeting of the City of Elmhurst Zoning and Planning Commission. I'm going to first do our procedure now that we need to follow to make sure everyone can hear me. So I'm going to check with everyone before we do that. Let's go first to the applicant room. Emily, can you hear me? And can the applicants all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Commissioner McCoy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Commissioner Callaway, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Commissioner Hoffman, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
In the public comment room, Assistant City Manager Mike Kopp, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
And there was someone I know, Ms. Dungan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Great. Kiki Andriopoulos, our court reporter, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Commissioner Snyder, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Commissioner Burns, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
And I believe this is the Blairs here. KMSGB Blair 06.
Yes, we can hear you.
Mr. and Ms. Blair, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. We can hear you.
Excellent. Commissioner Uditsky, can you hear me?
Yes.
Commissioner Garland, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Mr. Mark Daniel, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Good evening, everyone.
Great. City Attorney Andrew Ecker, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Mr. Abuna, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Ms. Orth, Deborah Orth, can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, slow on the mute button. I can hear you.
Great. Rita's iPad, can you hear me?
Yes, I could hear you.
Great. Aaron's iPad, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. Rachel Robert, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thanks, Chairperson Rose.
Commissioner Pittman, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, we don't have really video of you, but that's okay. Michael Mandu, and I don't see the rest of your name. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Kevin's iPad, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
All right.
Yes.
Eric Johnson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
And then last, Molly Novak, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Eileen, I will ask City Planner Eileen Franz to please call the roll to establish a quorum.
Thank you. Commissioner Burns.
Here.
Commissioner Callaway.
Here.
Commissioner Garland.
Here.
Commissioner Hoffman.
Here.
Commissioner McCoy.
Here.
Commissioner Pittman.
Here.
Commissioner Snyder.
Here.
Commissioner Uditsky.
Here.
Chair Rose.
Present. Thank you. You're going to have to turn your mic off. She's got it off. Okay. So first order of business is a public comment. This is the point in our meeting where if there is anyone either in the public comment room or at home watching this on YouTube who would like to make a public comment about any zoning issue and I would encourage you, if it's not on the agenda, but any zoning issue you want to make. So Mike Kopp, is there anyone in the public comment room who wishes to give public comment?
No, there is not.
Eileen, I'm going to ask you to check, and Emily to check voicemail or email if there's anyone who wishes to make public comment at this point.
So I checked the email and we have not received anything since 6:45 p.m. to the planning info email. So everything we've received so far has been added to board docs for case 20P19.
Great. Assistant City Planner, Emily Egan, is there anyone on voicemail who wishes to make public comment?
We do not have any voicemails, Chair Rose.
Okay, we will then close this section of our agenda, public comment. The next item on our agenda is the receipt of written communications. City Planner Franz, are there any written communications we have received that are not yet on board docs?
No, there are not.
Okay, thank you. Next item of business is approval of the minutes from the April 7th Zoning and Planning Commission. Can I get a motion to approve and a second for those minutes? Commissioner Snyder moves, and a second.
Second.
Commissioner Garland seconds. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections anyone wishes to make to these minutes? No? Okay. Seeing none, I will ask Eileen Franz to please call the roll.
Commissioner Snyder.
Yes.
Commissioner Garland.
Yes.
Commissioner Garland.
Yes.
Commissioner Burns,
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway,
Yes.
Commissioner Hoffman,
Yes.
Commissioner McCoy,
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman,
Yes.
Commissioner Uditsky,
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes, the minutes are approved. Next item of business before the committee is a continuing public hearing on case number 20P19, Mauricio Roberto's conditional use permits and administrative subdivisions at Engleston and Spring. I'm going to ask Eileen, do you want to just summarize where we are at this point?
Yes, thank you. This is the third evening of the public hearing for case 20P19. We originally began the hearing February 2nd and continued the hearing on March 16th. And we're here this evening for the continued public hearing on April 20th. Both the applicant and the attorney for the neighbors have submitted some additional information. I've also prepared a memo, and City Engineer Kent Johnson prepared a memo. All that information has been added to board docs. And I believe that the attorney for the applicant does have a PowerPoint presentation that he would like to go through this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think that would be when last we left, the attorney for the residents completed his presentation, and now I will turn it over to the applicant to go through their response to that. Are you going to have them share, or is Emily going to have them put up the PowerPoint?
Yes, they're in the applicant room with Emily, so she's going to share the screen so that Mr. Day can go through that.
All right, Mr. Day, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Is my microphone on?
Yes, it is.
Very well. First of all, I think we've actually already had 3 separate public hearings. We commenced in January and made our presentation on behalf of the applicant. On February 2nd, we processed an entire evening listening to the objectors submit questions and interrogatories essentially to the applicant. And we were instructed at that evening to take a complete inventory of the questions that were submitted and provide answers to those questions. Then on March 16th, Mark Daniel made a presentation and a PowerPoint presentation and essentially encompassed the entire evening with his portion of the presentation. We have also provided written responses to Mark Daniel. We submitted a 42-page document on Friday as promised, providing we got the city staff reports in time. We promised to have that on file on Friday. We were successful in doing so. And this evening we have rebuttal advocacy. I do want to state before we commence that Michael Mondes, who is our civil engineer, is here this evening. He is prepared to answer questions if any of the commissioners have any. We also have Louis Abuna present this evening. He is our parking and traffic engineer for this particular project. He is also present and available to answer questions. Both Pasquale and Vito Marisi are present as well and available to answer questions. And with that, I would like to begin our presentation.
Go ahead.
Before we started this process, you found copies of this 42-page petition in your file. They were posted to board documents, and these were processed by a not-for-profit firm that was incorporated by Grant Dungan. Grant Dungan is the same firm that Mark Daniel represents, and that is Grant Dungan. His wife testified previously, his son testified previously, his daughter testified previously, and his son-in-law testified previously. So we've had the entire Dungan family, as well as their not-profit, as well as their attorney involved in this particular process. And this petition was expressly filed by their not-profit association. What they've essentially alleged is that the establishment and maintenance of this conditional use will somehow or other be detrimental and endanger the public health, safety, morals, and comfort or general welfare of their community. And the conditional use, if granted, will be injurious to the use and enjoyment of residences in the immediate vicinity. And the establishment of the conditional use will impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of their surrounding residential properties. Next page. They've also asserted that we have not submitted or proposed to provide any drainage for this project. That's what Mr. Daniel's client has asserted. And that the application is dependent upon the county and the city making extraordinary expenditures to solve flooding in the area. And that we are going to be contributing to extensive additional floodwaters and burden the already overloaded drainage system. That's the allegation that Mr. Daniel's client has made. The petition to the City Council also says that the measures proposed are inadequate to provide ingress and egress designed to minimize traffic congestion, and that traffic for commercial public parking deliveries to and from the commercial establishment are routed through their residential neighborhood. And we will create noise, nuisance, headlights, and traffic through their neighborhood. The petition to City Council expressly asserted that the proposed conditional use is contrary to the objectives of the current comprehensive plan. That's what Mr. Daniel's clients asserted. So their objections are essentially broken into 5 categories. Number 1, parking lots for commercial restaurants are not compatible with a residential street. Number 2, these 2 parking lots will cause flooding in a flood-prone area because drainage facilities are not proposed. 3, these 2 parking lots will cause detrimental traffic. 4, the 2 parking lots will depress property values. And 5, these 2 parking lots will violate the comprehensive plan's findings. Now, they were reliant upon an engineer. Randall Buss from SEMCON testified, and he submitted his curriculum vitae, and he's a qualified civil engineer. He also submitted a letter dated January 8th that he submitted directly to Kent Johnson, the city engineer, for stormwater. In this document, Mr. Buss asserted, by this correspondence and accompanying exhibits, I will address matters that should be of concern to the city and to the neighbors regarding drainage and stormwater management. And specifically, what he said is that conditional use permits should not be granted on a leap of faith. The petitioner should be held accountable to conclusively demonstrate that such parking lot construction project can be built without attendant variances. Now, Kent Johnson actually responded to Mr. Buss. He actually wrote a report dated April 15th, 2021. This is the cover page for that report. In the document, he specifically said that at this juncture, it appears that the applicant and their engineer understand the city's codes regarding stormwater management and that their preliminary design is acceptable. That's the city's engineer saying what we have proposed is in conformity with your codes. He's also gone on to say the city does not agree with the SEMCON opinion. The city staff has consulted with DuPage County staff on this opinion, and they are in concurrence with the city staff that the city alone controls the stormwater permitting for this project. It does not, as Mr. Buss insists, rely upon the county intervening. And Mr. Johnson specifically said, I do not see a scenario where parking in proposed new parking lots would be any more of a risk than the current street parking in the area during extreme rain events, which cause overland flooding. And it goes on to specify in this paragraph that although the city has a design to cure all the flooding in this area, it's not currently funded. Our project is in no way reliant upon city funding to solve stormwater management in this area. So essentially what the city's engineer is saying is Mr. Buss is incorrect. He is mistaken. The engineer that they are relying upon, the engineer that is guiding the neighbors who wrote that petition is incorrect. His letter to Kent Johnson is incorrect. His concern as to whether or not the neighbors and the city should be concerned over drainage is incorrect. And his concern that the conditional use should not be granted is incorrect. The engineering opinion submitted on behalf of these applicants is not accurate. It is mistaken. Next, Mr. Daniel, you will recall, presented this exhibit to you, and he specified that there was an impervious surface violation being proposed. And this is in the March 16th transcript at page 28. He went on to add this additional exhibit and said that the impervious surface on these projects is going to exceed what is permitted by the city code. Now, Eileen France on April 15th responded to this particular assertion in a written opinion. As the city zoning administrator, she specified, if parking lots are not structures, do the impervious surface requirement per this section apply? Answer, per the city code, permeable pavement is considered to be a pervious surface, section 24.20, and not counted as an impervious surface. With that taken into consideration, the north parking lot is 39% impervious and the south parking lot is 34% impervious, according to the applicant's engineer. Based on this, the applicant is not going beyond the maximum permitted impervious coverages for these lots, which means Mark Daniel's opinion on the impervious surface is incorrect, and his second exhibit is also incorrect and mistaken. And that brought us to his next assertion. Mark Daniel asserted that the front yard averaging is required and that we are violating that by only providing a 25-foot deep front yard along Engleston. And he detailed this in a meticulous document where he measured each of the buildings in the area and then came up with the averages and specified that each of the two parking lots would violate the required averaging for the front yard. Once again, Eileen Franz provided an opinion with respect to this particular issue. What is the required front yard setback for the properties on Engleston? Answer, in the residential districts, setbacks are required based on a particular use. For example, the single family residence in the R2 district would need to maintain a 25-foot yard setback or the average of the block, whichever is greater for main or accessory building or structure. The zoning ordinance establishes a 25-foot setback for parking lots in office and commercial districts, but does not address parking setbacks in a residential district. Historically, staff has applied the setbacks of the primary use of the parking lot, not average of the block. This interpretation is based upon the definition of structure as defined in the Elmhurst zoning ordinance. So the 25-foot setback that we are providing is accurate. That is what is required by the code. And Mark Daniel's opinion with respect to the front yard averaging is mistaken. His assertion that there is a violation because we haven't averaged in the front yards is also mistaken. Next, Mr. Daniel asserted that there's a 16-foot mandatory transitional yard and that we are violating that. This is at page 37 of the March 16th, 2021 report of proceedings. He also went on with this exhibit to detail where the violations occurred on the north parking lot and where those violations occurred on the south parking lot. And then once again, Eileen Franz, the city zoning administrator, specifically responded to this assertion. Is the transitional yard requirement being met? Her answer, the transitional yard requirement is not applicable to the properties subject to the request as they are zoned R2 and R4. This requirement is for commercially zoned properties and specifically references a building or a structure. Drive aisles and parking lots are not considered structures per definition of structure in the Elmhurst zoning ordinance. So once again, Mr. Daniel's opinion regarding the 16-foot transitional yard violation is mistaken, as is his measurement for the north lot, as is his measurement for the south lot. His next assertion is that parking lots actually are a structure, and this appears at page 39 of the report of proceedings of March 16th. And he went on to include how each of these particular lots then as a structure has a different lot coverage provision. Eileen Franz answered this particular question. Are parking lots considered structures? Her specific answer as zoning administrator is no. Parking lots are not considered structures. The Elmhurst zoning ordinance section 22.292 definition defines a structure as it means a combination of materials to form a construction that is safe and stable, including among others, buildings, stadiums, review stands, platforms, stages, observation towers, radio towers, water tanks, towers, trestles, piers, wharves, sheds, pole bins, shelters, etc. Once again, Mark Daniels' opinion with respect to definition of a structure is mistaken, as is his calculation of the lot coverage under the definition of structure. Next was Mr. Daniels' assertion on page 51 of the 316 proceedings that parking lots are not allowed as a conditional use. And he added a second exhibit that actually listed the conditional uses in the R2 and the R4 zoning districts. Eileen Franz addressed this particular issue. Parking lot is not listed as a conditional use in R2 or R4. However, section 22.242 of the parking regulations does permit a conditional use at this particular location. And that is how the city staff has interpreted the conditional use. And with recollection, if you'll recall, in 2002, when the Marisi family filed their first application for a conditional use, the record of that particular proceeding expressly finds that a conditional use is permitted under this particular zoning district at this location as a conditional use. So the record goes back almost 20 years on this. So Mr. Daniels' assertion on the parking not being allowed is, as a conditional use, is incorrect. I'm sorry, mistaken, as well as the second exhibit. Then we had Mark Daniel on no similar commercial parking lot. This is in the 3/16/2021 at page 52. This is an unusual assertion in light of the fact that the city owns the only public parking lot in the Spring Road Business District. It is located behind commercial structures, including a bar that has a liquor license. It includes floodplain exactly like the subject property, and includes ingress egress off of Engleston. And the comprehensive plan contemplates expanding that parking lot by blowing down or purchasing the two homes immediately at the north end of that parking lot and turning them into additional city parking. That's what's in the 2009 comprehensive plan. Now, Eileen Franz went ahead and listed previous conditional use that was actually approved, and then also listed a whole series, I believe there's a total of 8 bullet points there of other locations that have surface parking lots immediately adjacent to residential where you have facilities that have a liquor license. And no, that list does not include the city's own public parking lot in Spring Road. So Mr. Daniels' assertion that there are no similar commercial parking lot uses is incorrect as it relates to both. And then lastly, we have Mr. Daniels' assertion that there was a violation of the 300-foot to entry. This occurred at 2 separate locations in the transcript. First was at page 56 of the proceedings, and second was at page 86. And he asserted that it is always in the suburban communities, the requirement that accessory parking be located within 300 feet of the entry of the facility. That was his assertion. Arlene Franz responded to this. Once again, Mr. Daniel is mistaken. The ordinance does not provide specific language indicating that this applies to a main entrance as it does in a subsequent section of the code, nor is any clear direction provided as to how this 300 foot should be measured. Due to the absence of express language providing clarification, measurement is being done from the property line. The property at 469 Spring Road is within 300 feet of the north lot, and the property at 481 through 489 Spring Road is within 300 feet of the proposed southerly property. Both of these lots are within the 300-foot dimension under the city code. So once again, Mr. Daniel's assertion is mistaken in his interpretation of the code. Now, you'll recall, for those that read our 42-page answer to the various objecting property owners, that we had an extensive dissertation of all the efforts that went through over the course of the last 6 to 7 months in an effort to try to reach out with and meet the neighbors and discuss things such as landscaping, fencing, lighting, and their preferences in this particular area. So you understand the problems that we have had with the neighbors. I will tell you that the Eisenmenger family actually did come out and speak with Pasquale, and they indicated that if there's going to be fencing at that location, they would prefer that it be 8 feet instead of the standard 6 feet that's permitted by the code. What Greengrass did, they're our landscape construction firm, and Jeff Johnson, who did this work very nicely for the Marisi family, is not available this evening. So he has written on these exhibits the type of landscape material that is proposed, and he's done 2 different alternative plans for each of the 2 parking lots. The first plan is 100% opacity in the form of greenery. Some people like fencing, some people prefer greenery. So we wanted to give the Plan Commission as well as the neighbors the choice. This particular version is 100% greenery without a fence. It has a very natural and very soft appearance. Those 4 yellow columns that you see are concrete-filled bollards. They are intended to make sure that if a vehicle accidentally puts the car in drive and jumps over the 6-inch curb, it will run into a concrete pillar before it can go through the greenery and into the Eisenmenger home. The next exhibit. This is the same view with the same bollards. It has different landscaping because in this one, we have incorporated an 8-foot vinyl white fence. This is virtually the same type of white vinyl fence that you see down in the Sailor area just east of Spring Road, where a number of single-family residences butt right up against commercial parking lots and alleyways. So this is a sample of what it would look like for those neighbors that really prefer to have 100% opacity of fencing and a softer, lighter greenery. Still, the bollards are incorporated so vehicles cannot go through at the place where it is closest to the house and their deck. Next, we next move to the south parking lot. This is Otis Dungan's home, and Mr. Dungan and his wife specifically indicated that they were very concerned that cars would jump the curb, run through the landscaping, run into their home, and they have power meters and other elements at the house that they're afraid could be damaged. There was concern that there could be damage to the house itself, and because Mrs. Dungan has some disabilities in terms of mobility, there was a great deal of concern that she would be trapped in the home. The bollards have been incorporated specifically with that concern. The first proposal that you have here is the view of the Dungan home from the parking lot, and you can see the level of the arborvitae plantings. Once again, these would provide the 100% opacity and a soft greenery. In the alternative, we can provide the white fencing with a softer, lower landscaping on this side of the fence, still accompanied by the same bollards. At the south end of the parking lot, you can see Dr. Blair's residence. Dr. Blair is that last unit in the townhomes, and he testified that he's going to be 5 feet from the parking lot, and it would be very intrusive for him to have cars 5 feet away from his home. This shows the greenery and the lush greenery that is proposed if no fencing is incorporated. And once again, this is the arborvitae and 100% opacity. The alternative proposal, once again, has the white 8-foot fencing and a lower level of financing, lower level of vegetation in terms of the landscaping to accompany the hard fencing scape. Now, this looks north at the Dungan property. This is from the south leg of the parking lot on the south parking lot. This is the part that is zoned R4, where it is claimed that there is buried asbestos and mounds of debris. This looks from the parking lot north. First house there on the left is the Dungan home. The house on the right is the Noyce home, and Mr. Noyce also came and testified. This shows the 100% landscaping opportunity. This is the same view with the fencing and the shorter foliage at this particular location. Now, one thing I'm going to have Mike Mondes do is explain to you an alternative site plan that we came up with for this south parking lot in response to some of the concerns that were raised in the questions of the objectors. And we asked that certain modifications, well, this again is the Blair residence. We'll skip through this exhibit. You've seen that with the fencing. This is the optional site plan. Now, in the optional site plan that you're going to see, the south parking lot leg is actually swung southeasterly, and it creates a greater setback at the Noyce home, and yet a smaller, but albeit more plentiful setback than is currently proposed in the standard parking configuration. It also moves the entire south leg of the parking lot further east. This shows the alternative plan that we are going to propose, or at least throw out as an option this evening from the south parking lot, and that's the Blair home in the background. Next slide. This shows the same angle with the white fencing. This looks north to the Dungan property from the alternative plan and the Noyce property. And this looks north to the Dungan and the Noyce property with the white fencing and the altered foliage at this location. Close up of the Blair property with this altered configuration. You can see the greater setback from the parking. I now think you will hear from Mike Mondes that it's approximately 20 feet from Mr. Blair's exterior of his home. By moving the lot further east, it creates a greater space for greenery for snow removal. And then this is the view with the fencing in place. Now, the proposed south parking lot that we currently have proposed is as configured on Exhibit 68 before you. At this point in time, I'm going to ask Mike Mondes to join in on the conversation so that he can explain this being the configuration of the standard parking lot, and then he will show the alternative parking lot or the optional parking lot that could be achieved. Michael?
Thank you, Scott. So as Scott indicated, what we want to focus on is the south leg of this parking lot, the portion that's on the R4 parcel. So this is our current proposed plan, and of highlight that we should take note of is the setbacks. So as currently shown, there is a consistent 10-foot setback between the back of the curb of the parking lot and the rear property line of the Dungan and Noyce residence of approximately 10 feet. And then on the east side of this parking lot that is immediately adjacent to Dr. Blair's townhouse, there is a 5-foot minimum setback provided there, and I believe it's about 10 or 15 feet to the actually it's about 10 feet to the residence, the closest portion of the residence there. And then along the prairie path to the south, the setback varies from just over 2 feet on the west side to a little over 16 feet on the east side. So
excuse me, I'm going to interrupt because I don't believe we've had people sworn in. This is Mr. Mondes is a new witness. Is that correct?
I testified in the first hearing.
I think we should still, this is, while this is a continuation, I think we just heard from city attorney that we really do need to re-swear people in. So I'm so sorry to interrupt, but
not a problem.
I'm going to ask folks, anyone who intends to speak this evening on this case, I'm sorry, would you please raise your right hand? And I will ask the court reporter to swear you in. Okay. Kiki, please swear them in.
Okay. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that any testimony you give in this manner will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I do.
Thank you. I'm sorry for that oversight, but now I'm feeling a little better about it. Please
No
continue, Mr. Mondes.
Not a problem. So as I indicated, this is the current plan. We walked through the current setbacks of what's proposed. So if you go to the next slide, Scott. So we looked at a optional layout where the south leg of this parking lot, we turned so it parallels the prairie path. You know, this property's kind of got an angle, if you will, along the property line with the prairie path. So we took the parking lot and we turned it so it's parallel to that lot line along the south end, and that generates a setback there of about a consistent setback of just over 5 feet along the prairie path. But what it does do is it increases the setback areas along the north and east leg of that parking lot. The setback, as we indicated previously, was 10 feet consistently along the back of the Dungan and Noyce yards. Now starts at 10 feet at the west corner of that parking lot. It increases to just over almost 21 feet as it gets to the eastern corner, and averages about 15 foot along that north end of that parking lot, increasing that setback drastically for additional landscaping and just further setback. But what it also does is on the east end, it increases the setback from that east property line, where previously we were at 5 feet. We start at 10 feet at the very northeast corner, and it increases to just short of 18 feet at the southeast corner. But it does get the parking lot setback from the closest point of the residence of Dr. Blair's townhouse to the back of the curb of over 20 feet. So, you know, a much improved setback ratio for this configuration. The other thing this layout did do or necessitates is we've taken the ADA parking that in the previous plan was up along Engleston Road, and we've relocated it to a configuration where we would propose the demolition of a portion of the very eastern portion of the current restaurant building, or the current building, I should say, and the reconstruction of that building with a rear entry. So the ADA stalls now are immediately adjacent to what would be a new entry into a proposed building addition, demolition addition. What this plan does is it really necessitates or forces the dealing of this east leg of this building to be dealt with. And you know, I know the memo Scott presented goes into a lot of those issues, but that building currently, this entire building has a basement configuration. So you can't just lop off a small portion of the building. You have to deal with the entire leg of the building because it's got a basement. So, you know, this layout really forces the Marisi family to undertake a very large investment to construct this parking lot configuration, as well as upgrades to the restaurant itself. I think that was it. I don't know, Scott, there was anything else?
I think that's it. Thank you very much, Michael.
Excuse me, Scott, before you continue, will you just please confirm for us that the unsworn testimony that was given really is the same as the sworn testimony? This is just a little tying up an end of that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So in terms of side-by-side comparison, you can see that the major configuration is moving the entire parking lot roughly 20 feet to the west towards the building. It does require that we knock off about 20 feet of that building. It does have a full basement, which means we're going to have to reconfigure the entire building in order to build the parking lot if we go with this configuration. But it gives 4 times the setback to Dr. Blair's house, a considerably greater setback, at least double for the Noyce property. And for much of the Dungan property, it increases it by at least 50%. And then in terms of this lot configuration, what we are proposing, we will either go with 100% opacity of the landscaping as proposed by Greengrass, or we will go with the lower level of landscaping coupled with the white vinyl fencing consistent with the other fencing that's in the neighborhood, Our lighting is indeed code compliant. It meets all of the standards of the city. And for purposes of permeable pavers, we are using the permeable pavers that are referenced in the stormwater ordinance. Next exhibit. Going back to the objector's assertions, they fall into these 5 categories. 1, parking lots for commercial restraints are not compatible with a residential street. 2, the 2 parking lots will cause flooding in a flood-prone area because drainage facilities are not proposed. 3, these 2 parking lots will cause detrimental traffic. 4, these 2 parking lots will depress property values. And 5, these 2 parking lots will violate the comprehensive plan. We don't think that any of these objections are valid. First, assertion number 1, parking lots with a commercial restaurant is not in harmony with a residential street. In general, that's what the objectors are asserting. They're asserting that if you put a parking lot on their street, on these particular lots, where they are, according to the zoning administrator, permitted as a conditional use, they will not be in harmony with a residential street. And our position is the finding that they are asking the city to make is expressly contrary to the legislative construction imposed upon the city by the Living Word decision. This is a Supreme Court decision, and in Living Word, the Supreme Court used these words. In sharp contrast to a variance, the inclusion of a special use, and believe me, special use and conditional use are exactly the same terms in zoning. In sharp contrast to a variance, the inclusion of a special use within a zoning ordinance, quote, is tantamount to a legislative finding that the permitted use is in harmony with the general zoning plan and will not adversely affect the neighborhood. That's not Scott Day speaking. That's the Illinois Supreme Court. That's the Illinois Supreme Court that is saying what the fact that Elmhurst has made a conditional use of parking at this location means. They go on to say, there has been a local legislative determination that the use as such is neither inconsistent with the public's health, safety, morals, or general welfare, nor out of harmony with the town's general zoning plan. That's exactly the opposite of the finding that the residents insisted upon in their petition. And that's the finding they're asking you to make. Living Word goes on to state, it is generally held that an application for a special use permit may not be denied on the ground that the use is not in harmony with the surrounding neighborhood. Again, that's not Scott Day saying that. That's the Illinois Supreme Court. In the end, essentially, there has to be something that is inherently different from a parking lot in any other residential neighborhood. It can't be the attributes of a parking lot that are the same for all parking lots in virtually all neighborhoods. So assertion number 2, these 2 parking lots will cause flooding or drainage problems in a flood-prone area. And remember, they've been told that we're not providing any stormwater damage stormwater management facilities of any kind. That is factually false. I don't know where they've gotten such false engineering information, but our application specifically proposes that we will be excavating the site, removing non-bearing soils, loading the site with engineered gravel, placing permeable pavers on top of the engineered gravel at a code compliant elevation. And then the stormwater will seep through the permeable pavers into the voids in the gravel. That was the testimony from Mike Mondes. He's here to once again reiterate that particular fact. But somehow or other, the neighbors have circulated petitions to your community saying that we're not providing any stormwater storage at all. And you know that your engineer has found that what we are proposing is an acceptable design for the facility. So our rebuttal is simply this. The city of Elmhurst cannot find that a parking lot constructed in strict conformity with the city of Elmhurst drainage regulations, written and administered by the city itself, will cause flooding or drainage problems. Compliance with these administrative regulations is an administrative finding that the applicant will not be flooding its neighbors. Thus, if we don't get a building permit, we can't build the structure. And if you issue a building permit inclusive of compliance with the stormwater, it is a finding from the city that we are not causing flooding. Assertion number 3, these 2 parking lots will introduce commercial traffic into a residential neighborhood. Our rebuttal response is this. The City of Elmhurst Zoning and Planning Commission has no basis in the record of this proceeding, despite now 4 evenings, to find that these 2 parking lots will cause traffic problems at all. The city's consultant expressly states to the contrary. First, we tendered the report from KLOA, and Louis Abuna is here this evening. His findings incorporated these bullet points amongst others, that with the development of the proposed parking lots with access off Engleston Avenue, the roadway is projected to continue operating as a local roadway. The increase in available parking will reduce the number of vehicles that circulate the area attempting to look for additional parking locations, and outbound movements from the access drives should be under stop sign control. Those were the KLO recommendations in writing. Your consulting engineer actually responded to this. She is from Sam Swartz, and Kelly Conley provided this particular document to Kent Johnson in response. Sam Schwartz overall agrees with KLOA that the increase in restaurant-related traffic on Engleston Avenue is not expected to be significant from a capacity standpoint, and that no traffic control modifications are warranted at this time. So once again, although the residents are insisting that we're going to have bad traffic problems driven by this particular project, it is contradicted by all of the expert reports in this particular case, and they are insisting on nothing more than an inherent attribute of parking lots adjacent to residential. They insist because it's a parking lot and because there will be cars, it will cause traffic. And that's the one allegation that they can't make, because that is something that is inherent in every parking lot located on residential property. Next, assertion number 4. The neighbor has insisted that commercial parking lots located adjacent to single-family homes and townhomes will inherently depress property values. Now, they've offered nothing to establish this. It's just that inherent with being adjacent to a parking lot, their immediately adjacent value will be depressed. In response, this concern is contrary to the public records of equalized assessed value throughout Spring Road. We provided an extensive binder. We provided you the maps. We showed you all of the homes. We gave you the tax records for the past 5 years. We incorporated all the sales documents that reflect when those properties sold within that 5-year time span. This assertion is, their assertion is that universal property value diminution contradicts the standard of living word. You can't make the finding that they're asking you to make. The maps that we have provided incorporate those lots that are on Hillside adjacent to the condominium property right up by the railroad. They incorporate, this is the city lot. And this is the one that I wanted you to take a look at, because when we get to the comprehensive plan, you can see that the city parking lot wraps around the frontage buildings, and it is adjacent to the property, the furthest west yellow property on Engleston. And then there are 2 parcels that are immediately to the north. Those are the 2 parking lots, or those are the 2 homes that your comprehensive plan is recommending the city consider purchasing to expand your parking lot behind the commercial frontage, immediately adjacent to residential, and having access directly off of Engleston. Exactly what we're proposing in an area that is under 2 feet of floodwater, just like our parcel is in a 100-year storm event. Next is our configuration, and you can see the Eisenbinder property right there. It is already adjacent to a commercial parking lot for the car wash. And you can see the home to the immediate east of that. I believe that that property owner is actually here. That home is adjacent to 2 separate commercial parking lots, including one that is utilized for a bar that serves alcohol and has a liquor license. And I think that both of these property owners will tell you that they've never had a car drive through the fencing and into their lot or their home. Next is the lot that is involved in this particular southerly parking lot. And this is the commercial parking area behind Roberto's and the 2 medical offices at the north corner. Next is the parking lots that are down off of Montrose Avenue and north of the alley. Those particular parcels then butt onto properties. I'm sorry, this is on the west side of Spring Road. And those properties on Hillside behind the alley, This is the block that includes the Spring Inn, and the largest house there immediately to the west of the Spring Inn, I believe, has a 10-foot white vinyl fence separating it from the parking area and the alley behind the Spring Inn. The next mapping is Hillside Avenue. We are still south. That runs us all the way down to the left. This is a block where the Marisi family has a large ownership interest. Again, the homes in this particular block back directly up to the commercial parking lots for the commercial uses that have frontage directly on Spring. And then across the street from that is one of the more relevant particular parking lots. Because this includes not only the parking lots that are off of the frontage, but as you move back towards Montrose, there's a parking lot that is removed from the frontage of Spring. And that particular parking lot is adjacent to a very nice home with an assessed value of approximately $980,000 and across the street from one of the objectors. You can see that the Sailor Avenue parking lot is the dark one there, wedged in between various yellow properties. 550 Sailor Avenue has a fair cash market value, according to the assessor, of $908,490. And that was new construction in 2005. So it's been built within the last 16 years. Across the street is the Romanowski property, 555 Sailor. That has a fair cash market value of $588,090. They're immediately across from a parking space. And yet Mr. Romanowski is one. There you can see their configuration and their location in relationship to that parking lot. And then you can see Mr. Romanowski's signature is in the lower left-hand corner on the petition that says if you put a parking lot in the neighborhood, it's going to depress the property values and impact the sanctity of their particular neighborhood. This is one of the individuals that signed that particular petition. Here's the 550 Sailor from looking at it from Mr. Romanowski's property. And there's the parking lot to the north of that. And you can see that what has separated that $900,000 home from the parking lot is a white vinyl fence of exactly the same type that we are proposing. And once again, I don't believe that there is any record of any of the vehicles jumping the curb and going through the fencing. There are some trees there that provide additional protection at this location, but you can see somebody built a nearly $1 million home at this location immediately adjacent to a parking lot, as long as they had screening from trees, shrubs, and a white vinyl fence. That leads us to assertion number 5 that the petitioners have insisted, is that these two parking lots violate the comprehensive plan. And our response to this, and I'm going to spend some detailed slides going through the comprehensive plan specifics because this is simply a false assertion. The objector assertion contradicts the clear recommendations of the Spring Road sub-area plan. First of all, this comprehensive plan specifies that it is the chief tool for guiding and facilitating growth and redevelopment within the community, as well as planning for the delivery of public services in a timely and efficient manner. The comprehensive plan is formally adopted statement of policies that articulate a future vision for Elmhurst and describe the actions the city decision makers can take to turn this vision into reality. There's a summary of plan elements in land use development. Future land use framework is intended to provide a blueprint of future development pattern of the city of Elmhurst by indicating the type and organization of uses that would most effectively help the city meet its comprehensive planning goals. A major focus of the land use strategy is to update the city's zoning code to reflect goals, objectives, and policies recommended in the plan, which include reinforcing mixed-use development in designated locations, such as in downtown and in sub-areas. The comprehensive plan expressly states community sub-areas. The new comprehensive plan focuses on 9 community sub-areas. These locations are comprised of primarily non-residential land uses, generally located along highly visible transportation corridors and gateways, as well as within the city's neighborhood commercial shopping areas. As a mature community with few new areas for development, the plan seeks to leverage the economic development possibilities from these locations while ensuring stable and compatible land use relationships with adjoining areas. That's the purpose of this plan. The 2009 comprehensive plan expressly states, additionally, a number of sub-areas are on the brink of a major change the city should proactively seek to direct for the benefit of the entire community. Now, in economic development, there's a section about economic development in the comprehensive plan that specifies developmental assistance resources then must be prioritized. Maximum impact must be leveraged from comparatively limited non-residential development opportunities. In order to assist in this process, Goodman-Williams Group conducted a market assessment that was released in April 2007 to evaluate the existing development environment and what types of development would be supported by projected growth trends. That Goodman-Williams report specified efforts to recruit and assist businesses should continue in city centers as well as in Vallette and York and Spring Road business districts. Focus should be on independent or regional retailers in the following categories. The very first one recommended by Goodman is restaurants, and specific to encouraging and strengthening restaurants in the Spring Road area. So how did they go about the specific planning? They identified the 9 districts, and then they actually went through an extraordinary process with respect to 4 of the districts. The community involvement in early stages of the planning process brought focus to several locations in the city, requiring particular thought and consensus to determine a desired future. The Elmhurst Community Scan Report, prepared in July 2007, identified 9 community subareas which were examined in more detail. Of those 9, 4 were chosen. One of the 4 that was chosen for special review, special analysis, and special consideration was Spring Road. How did they do that? First of all, they did a public workshop. Public workshops were conducted with a broad cross-section of residents and business owners invited to develop future scenarios of the type and intensity of development most desirable in each of the 4 selected sub-areas. It goes on to state that while the future land use framework included in the plan, that's the overall plan, is more generalized, the detailed concept developed during the sketch plan builders workshop fostered valuable discussion and insight into community preferences for key areas. The public workshop, while each group developed its own scenario and future recommendations, several common themes emerged from the public workshops. And here's the participants. You can see it's a who's who of community figures in Elmhurst as of the date that the plan was put together, including Pete DeCiani, John Quigley, a number of other representative names that you will all recognize. These are the people that put together this sub-area plan for Spring Road. And what did they do with respect to their recommendations of the Spring Road? This is the local business group, the public group. Land use recommendations proposed by the 6 groups for the Spring Road Business District sub-area are identified below. 1, preserve as a neighborhood scale commercial corridor. 2, in general, maintain existing development patterns south of the Prairie Path. And here we go. Consider 2-story mixed-use office or residential above commercial north of the Prairie Path. Mixed-use development was proposed for both sides of Spring Road by different groups. Provide more parking, especially if the area is developed with more intense uses. The following areas were proposed for additional parking. 1 is on the south side of the Prairie Path and doesn't apply. 2, single family parcels west of Spring Road extend to the existing parking lot to Engleston Avenue. That's the city lot. Their recommendation was to purchase those 2 houses and extend the city's existing commercial lot all the way north so that it has a full frontage on Engleston. And then they go on. Single family homes behind the commercial uses east of Spring Road. That's our parcels. Those are our parcels. Single family homes behind the commercial uses east of Spring Road, especially south of Engleston Avenue. That's the location where they're saying put additional parking. Next sheet. Then there was a city staff workshop. In addition to the public workshop, there was one that was put together by the city professional planning staff. They came up with their recommendations, and the relevant ones are, they actually call out the Roberto's parcel by name. The city planning staff came up with The vacant parcel behind Roberto's restaurant should be developed as a commercial use associated with the restaurant. That's your planning staff. And then additional parking could be provided by acquiring single-family homes on Engleston behind the commercial parcels east of Spring Road. Your planning staff is saying exactly what we are proposing as their city staff workshop for how Spring Road should be developed. Next, then it went to the Zoning and Planning Commission. Your predecessors on this particular panel also went through and did a planning commission workshop on these issues. They came up with the same conclusion. Additional parking could be provided by acquiring single-family homes on Engleston behind the commercial parcels east of Spring Road. So when the objectors assert that this particular application doesn't conform with the comprehensive plan, I think they are mistaken. I don't think they're reading the same document. I don't think in my career I have ever been involved in an application for a conditional use where the comprehensive plan actually called out one of the parcels I was petitioning for a conditional use to switch the use to a commercial use. I don't think I've ever had a situation where I had actual vignette workshops from a public purpose group, a city staff, as well as a plan commission that called out the specific locations where we're proposing a conditional use to be used and converted to parking. I think it's the clearest indication of a comprehensive plan that at least I've run across in my career. So let's go back to the general assertion that has been submitted. The objectors really have a generic concern. They have a generic concern that the parking lots will generate traffic, they're going to generate noise, they're going to generate cars, they're going to generate lights, and those things are inherent in every parking lot. Every special parking lot, every special use parking lot and a residential zone parcel that's abutting commercial, which is what this commercial conditional use is, will have traffic, noise, cars, and lights. Those are all attributes that are inherent in every conditional use, and they cannot be the basis of a denial according to the language of the Supreme Court. So in rebuttal, the City of Elmhurst Council has made a legislative finding that parking lots on a residential street within 300 feet of C1 zone property are in harmony with adjacent residential properties. To be out of harmony with the residents, the parking lot must present some unique or different adverse effect other than traffic, noise, cars, and lights, and that doesn't exist. Next slide. Now, parking for the two Maurice's buildings is inadequate. I'm just going to give you 6 points on this factor. 1, Roberto's is the most intense use in the Spring Road Business District, and when the restaurant is busy, the parking supply is inadequate. That's a quote from Fan Werner in his 2002 parking study. It's also a quote that's virtually identical to one that was voiced by Tom Borchard in 2002 when he was commenting upon the parking study of the city. Number 2, parking is not evenly distributed within the Spring Road Business District, and the block with the greatest deficit, 41 parking spaces, is adjacent parking is the back, in adjacent parking is the block of the two Maurice buildings where these parking lots are proposed. That block is the block that the city's own 2002 traffic report found to be the most deficient in immediately adjacent parking in the entire Spring Road District. 3, the current president of the Spring Road Business Association has submitted a written letter dated December 6, 2020, and states, members of the Spring Road Business Association would contend that lack of convenient available parking continues to be the leading complaint of customers and patrons that visit Spring Road. 4, based on the Institute of Traffic Engineers, an entity that studies parking profiles. It studies the parking profiles for a whole variety of different restaurants, and they categorize them as quality restaurants, high turnover restaurants, fast food restaurants, quick serve, drive-through restaurants. They've got different parking profiles for every one of them. Based on their qualifications and based on their studies that have occurred over the last 40 years, Roberto's, based upon its square footage and or its seating capacity, needs anywhere between 112 and 182 parking spaces. Roberto's has 7. Based on the Urban Land Institute, a restaurant of 9,600 gross leasable area and 220 seats needs anywhere between 136 and 142 parking spaces. Roberto's has 7. Because readily available parking is in such high import to the entire Spring Road Business District, everybody that currently has their own off-street parking is prohibiting it from being shared. But these signs proliferate throughout Spring Road. You can see them at the Algren Funeral Home. You can see them at the Sailor parking lot. You can see them at the office building across from Algren. Next. More in the office building across from Algren. Then you have the facilities that are adjacent to the city commercial parking lot. Then you can see Silverado. You can see the condominium property. And if you drive up and down the streets, you will see that the city has posted no parking signs on the streets. The side streets have no parking signs posted on Engleston and on other side streets in this particular area, because apparently the overflow traffic is trying to park on the side streets because they can't get into the private no parking tow zones that are proliferated throughout the particular area. So why should the Zoning and Planning Commission approve this conditional use? Number one, the city has made parking lots a conditional use at both locations, and this fact is a legislative finding that parking lots at this location are in harmony with the general zoning plan and will not adversely affect this neighborhood. 2, the block which incorporate both proposed parking lots has the greatest deficiency of adjacent and readily available parking in the Spring Road Business District. 3, surface parking is the only economical viable use for the land proposed for the 2 parking lots, and the city has a constitutional obligation to avoid land use regulations that deny all economically viable use of the city of Elmhurst land. And understand, we are developing this property with the express understanding that currently the city doesn't have the money to fix the drainage problem. We are the only economically viable use that can be constructed in a parking lot that is under 2 feet of water in a 100-year storm event. All the rest of the uses for this parking lot that are economically serviceable cannot be constructed here because of the flood provisions. And the city doesn't currently have the money to fix the flooding problem. 4, surface parking lots at both locations are specifically encouraged by the 2009 Comprehensive Plan Spring Road Subarea and detailed planning separately recommended by 3 different subgroups, including the prior Plan Commission. This is supposed to be the vision of the city that will serve your economic needs at the point in time that Spring Road is ready to redevelop. And then 5, applicant is proposing to spend well in excess of $1 million of private funding to develop parking spaces at a cost of more than $23,000 per space in an area where the city and the taxpayers are otherwise responsible for providing adequate parking. Next page. The city engineers agree that if the applicant is providing a building permit to construct a code-compliant surface parking lot, the parking lots will have met strict city-imposed engineering regulations that are imposed to assure that new development and construction will not cause stormwater to damage neighboring properties. 7, the city traffic consultants agree that the proposed land use does not present a significant risk of new commercial traffic on Engleston. 8, in an area that has been persistently recognized as a mixed use incorporating commercial land use, commercial parking, single-family townhomes, apartments, industrial rail, the single best transitional land use between residential land use and non-residential land use is a well-screened, well-landscaped, code-compliant, illuminated surface parking lot. Look no further than the city's own commercial parking lot at a nearly identical location. 9, surface parking as a transitional land use has proven historically to be highly compatible, safe, benign to adjacent property value at multiple clearly documented locations throughout the Spring Road Business District. And 10, the surface parking lots proposed by applicant are no different than the surface parking lot operated by the city of Elmhurst for the past 2 decades, in that both parking lots, A, are served by access to Engleston Avenue, B, are immediately adjacent to single-family homes, C, serve immediately adjacent food and beverage establishments with liquor license. D, are subject to the same periodic flooding during 100-year storm event. And E, allow the commercial street wall of Spring Road to remain consistent. And then last F, serve the pedestrian atmosphere deemed critical to this very special sub-area of the city of Elmhurst. Next. That is the end of our presentation. We are available to answer any questions you may have. But we thank you for your attention, and we hope that you accept our recommendation and can support the application.
Thank you very much, Mr. Day. I will ask, and I believe it is proper at this point, to ask Mr. Daniel as a representative of the neighbors, if you have any comments or wish to make any further comment at this point.
Thank you, Chair Rose. Again, I appreciate everyone's time on this. I do want to address a handful of issues. I think everyone's aware that we submitted written correspondence responsive to Eileen Franz's memorandum yesterday. It's dated April 19th. Today, we reviewed and responded to as quickly as we could Mr. Day's 42-page submittal. I also have comments about his presentation. I'd like to summarize, at least starting with the slides that he finished off. One of the things that as commissioners, everyone needs to be careful of here is you have to avoid accepting an overstatement of the opposition's position. It starts on slide 4. In the petition submitted by the neighbors, they say that the engineering does not provide for adequate stormwater. Adequate. When you go to page 7 and page 71 of the slides, Mr. Day converts the term adequate stormwater to no stormwater improvements. And for about 3 minutes during his presentation, he ranted about how the neighbors could be so ridiculous to state that from an engineering perspective. Well, they never stated it. It's called setting up a straw man to take it down. Your residents have done a great job in regards to this application to collect information and get information to you. And I think they deserve better. Our position on this is that Randy Buss is accurate in his assessment that the depressional storage area in this vicinity is greater than 20 acres. Staff's own exhibits showed this. Mr. Buss relied on Christopher Burke and an exhibit that Christopher Burke prepared in part of what I believe was an analysis of stormwater options at Spring and Engleston that seemingly has disappeared from the board document site that showed a $6 million budget for improvements in this area. Now, this depressional storage area is an issue for you to determine. Mr. Day states that the lot is under 2 feet of water during the 100-year storm. That's an important issue, whether it's above or below 20 acres, but jurisdictionally, the 20-acre issue is a big concern. I will also note that Mr. Day, in his presentation, misstated very relevant aspects of my presentation regarding impervious surface coverage. I presented his own witnesses' exhibits. I presented his own witnesses' calculation of impervious surface. I used their data. To the extent that there's a mistake, they are the ones that may have been mistaken, but the reality here is that they are changing the neighborhood. They've selected, cherry-picked certain aspects of our presentation. What they haven't addressed is the invasion into this neighborhood beyond that red line that I showed you on the slide of a commercial use. Scott Day, despite having the correspondence from yesterday, had nothing to say about staff's listing of the conditional use for the 3 properties on South Route 83. Office, storage, parking, daytime use, generally 9 to 5, not active when the residents are at home evenings, nights, and weekends. This is a different use than anything from Tree Towns to the north where the storage facility is located. Between the two, there's not a parking area there. There's an unpaved storage, equipment storage area. If you work around the other examples of liquor licensed facilities in Elmhurst that were given by staff, not a single one of them has an orientation of parking spaces similar to this parking lot. Not one. The only close development is the development that occurred at 83 and North Avenue on the northeast corner. In that instance, the homes were developed after the line of the parking lot was established. In this instance, you have 60 or 70 years of history of residential use. It's quite the contrary circumstance. Staff's list does not answer the question. And to suggest that there are similar other uses to what's being asked here in the city of Elmhurst is inaccurate. There is not one. And we went through that item by item, address by address, from West St. Charles Road near Villa Park, all the way north to North Avenue, east again, and then back down towards Route 83. Every single instance is a different circumstance than this. With respect to whether or not a parking lot is a structure, I think the commission needs to think about that a little bit. Read the definition. Some of you are attorneys, some of you can read quite well. I frankly think that the definition very clearly includes parking lots. When you take a look at the ordinance, parking lots have to have certain elements to them. There is a construction standard, there's a base, there's a surface course. That is your defined construction through parts and a means regulated by code to support the cars that are parked on them. They also require fences. They require the light standards that are now in the front yard. Speaking of front yards, to suggest there's inaccuracy or a mistake regarding the averaging circumstance is unsupported by anything in the zoning ordinance. When 40% or more of lots are developed in a residential street, you average the setbacks if they are greater than what's required by code. That's what you do to determine the front yard setback on that street. The absence of a provision that allows a 25-foot setback like it does in the commercial or industrial or other districts doesn't mean you can imply one into the R2 or the R4 district. You can't say, well, we do that in a commercial district, so let's do the same thing in the R2 or the R4. That's not it. The only provision on the books in this instance that is applicable is that 22.81D3, which says you average. This does not comply with it. I will note that at a number of points, we've talked about wrapping these homes, the single family homes, over towards Wild Meadows Trace. When it comes to the city's comprehensive plan, the comprehensive plan recommends acquisition by the city of the 2 homes that are closest to Spring on Engleston, north of the parking lot that the city owns. Why? Because those homes aren't ordinarily planned as a result of the location of the parking lot. It makes sense to take them out. Here you're planting a situation where this parking lot is going to wrap 2 single family homes and affect Wild Meadows Trace at the east end. Essentially, you're going to have the Dungans with front, side, and rear parking, completely surrounded. With respect to the comprehensive plan, it's interesting that Mr. Day explained to you that he'd never seen a circumstance like this where the plan so clearly supports an application. It doesn't. We've given you numerous examples of how the comprehensive plan does not support the project. To the extent that Mr. Day references acquisition of the lot behind Roberto's, that's the vacant lot. When they talk about parking, it's a different story. There is a plural use in each phrase that he raised. Acquire the homes, plural, behind the businesses on the east side of Eggleston. Those lots east of all the commercial uses from Eggleston to the Prairie Path have always been something the city has considered as territory to be developed in a uniform way. Some unified development, whether it's the 1971 court order, the 1991 amendment, or the comprehensive plan. It says homes, plural. You can't piecemeal this. I will also note that Scott raising the issue, the applicant, and I don't want to personalize this, but the applicant raising this issue of the city parking lot and saying that we're proposing the exact same thing on the other side of Spring, well, that's inaccurate. This is a private commercial parking lot. A publicly operated lot would be a different matter. There's a different public benefit entailed here. The city, in all likelihood, would follow its comprehensive plan, which is to allow for comprehensive planning involving the unified development of the homes, plural. But in this instance, you have a private parking lot. The alternative in this instance, I'm not sure if it's before you or not. There are a lot of questions about what's before you. They have live entertainment at Roberto's. The live entertainment restaurant is a conditional use. The addition is interesting. The abandonment of Mr. Abuna's parking study in largest part to agree that they are a quality restaurant that involves longer seating and a greater parking demand causes substantial concern, because in the big picture, they've now said we have a greater parking demand than represented to the owners on Spring Road and in the business association. We have a greater parking demand than talked about with Jose Maida and the folks at Maida Motors. The reality is that this quality restaurant does demand more parking. A larger quality restaurant demands more parking. I think I took it on the chin when it came to Mr. Day's response, the 42-page response. He called the discussion of banquet facilities rumor and innuendo. Falsehoods. They're not. Roberto's operates banquet services. They close off a restaurant that is not publicly accessible for things like baptisms, wakes, what have you, where I can't walk in there and grab a table. They've addressed it in writing, yet at the very opening of that 42-page missive, they deny having any interest in banquet opportunity. They want expanded banquet opportunity, and you know what that does? The expanded banquet opportunity sets all the parking planning along Spring Road to the side. Over the years, the parking on Spring Road ebbs and flows. There are daytime services, there are office uses, there are salons that operate on weekends. Over time, during the day, the parking demand for spaces on the streets and the city lots shifts from those uses to the restaurant and bar uses, the evening uses. And it's been a nice mix. It is a local business district intended to serve the needs of the neighborhood. And that's what it's been doing. The parking has been sufficient. Mr. Borchert found that in 2006. Mr. Warner found that in 2002. His comments are attached to Mr. Borchert's memo that we submitted last time. There hasn't been any new construction other than Kensington along that strip. When it comes to the parking analysis, that still remains fairly accurate. And I think it's very difficult to say that something has changed in this instance other than Roberto's own operations. When Mr. Day states that we are complaining about generally applicable parking lot concerns and says living word forbids the city from denying the conditional use, he's mistaken. There are plenty of reasons why the conditional use in this case shouldn't be granted. Hours of operation, liquor service, increased noise compared to other properties in the district that might benefit from this, such as office uses or mixed uses. Under the circumstances that you have on South Route 83, where you had the grant for tree towns for a brief period of time up until maybe 2014. Think about when Tree Towns closes. It might be 5 or 6 earlier during the pandemic, but I think they're still open 5 to 6, right around there. Neighbors come home. They have peace and quiet. Same thing on weekends. That's not what's going to happen here. All right, so I would ask that you very carefully review what we submitted in response to staff. There have been misrepresentations made about our use of the transitional yard requirement. Our position has been that yes, there may be a transitional yard requirement for the northeast corner lot, which was never evaluated by staff in their memo. They simply said that the transitional yard requirement wasn't applicable to the residential districts. Well, the reality is that the Planning and Zoning Commission certainly can require a transitional yard, and it should if it is extending that commercial use across a residential parcel. You have the power and the ability to do that, regardless of whether it's generally applicable in the R2 and R4. That is the position that we advanced. Under the circumstances, the exhibits presented tonight that show the fence and the landscaping very clearly establish that it is impossible to diminish the view impacts and the lighting impacts on the adjacent homes. The Dungans are going to be flooded out. This use will dominate their property. As you work your way east, the side yard impacts may be less, but the rear yard impact is still there. There is no upper screening. And you saw the condition of the rear of Roberto's. There's a bit of well, I wouldn't say a bit, there's a lot of information about what efforts Roberto's made after it finalized its plan to a point that they thought they could file it. Well, the reality is they made decisions and approached neighbors who were already upset with the Roberto's operation because of the conditions on site. In broad daylight, the lighting on the building is too bright. In broad daylight, it's too bright. You saw the condition of the building they're proposing to demolish now, if that's part of their application. Again, I'm not sure if that's what they're requesting here or not. As far as this evaluation of whether parking is required in the C1 district, you know, that somewhat falls into a category of Elmhurst zoning regulation that is somewhat sloppy. There's no clear exemption of the C1 district uses from the parking requirements. There's a provision in the ordinance that says you'll comply with Article 10, which is the parking article. And there's a provision that says you'll comply with 242, I think it's point 2A2 or something like that. It's a paragraph that says that in the central business area downtown, in the surrounding core area, you don't have to provide parking. It doesn't list the C1 district. So there's not a stated exception from providing parking in the district. A lot of the uses in that area are non-conforming lots, non-conforming structures, and they have non-conforming parking. Parking is important. Every use needs to have parking. One way that the city has continually regulated its districts is through parking regulation outside of the zoning ordinance. The city decides when and where to build a parking lot, and that affects development. That expands it. It can cause a contraction in development. On Eggleston, Mr. Day made a statement. I'm not sure if it came from one of the traffic reports. He is correct, saying that there's no parking on Eggleston east of Spring. The residents have testified, and it's, I think, uncontestable that there is parking allowed after school hours on Eggleston west of Spring. But the reality is that that has nothing to do with regulating business or trying to keep businesses out of the neighborhood. Eggleston is simply too narrow on the east side of Spring Road to allow emergency vehicles to pass without creating a hazard. You cannot have parking on that street. It's difficult for a vehicle to get by on that street as a truck when cars are backed up due to a train. A fire truck has problems. An ambulance has problems. It's less than your ordinary 66-foot wide right-of-way. That's why there's no parking there. Again, another example why this is a special instance compared to other lots in the zoning district that's R2 or R4 and abutting a C1. None of the parking lots noted in staff's memo rely on a residential street for their access. That's another very clear distinguishing factor between staff's list of liquor licensed operations that have parking near residential. So it is a very clear change in the neighborhood. I would ask that you very carefully review the submittals. Please pay attention. If you're going to review the 42-page submittal, or you're going to review Mr. Day's PowerPoint, there's somewhat of a practice of raising an issue and saying that it was raised when it wasn't, and then attacking what wasn't raised rather than attacking what was raised. There are some miscitations to the record, the transcript. Today, I think one of the pages noted that you could go to page 38 of the transcript, and it happens in a few different places. But it was the impervious surface violation slide where he cited to page 28 of the record of proceedings. But if you look at page 39, lines 4 to 13, this is just one example, you'll see the discussion of that exhibit. It tends to repeat itself when you compare today's slide presentation with the transcript from March 16th. There's a lot riding on this for the residents. To suggest that there's no impact from a traffic capacity perspective is different than saying there's no impact on traffic. The reality is that if you assume each of those spaces turns over for one event in the late morning, maybe a wake in the afternoon, and then turns over for dinner once during the evenings, twice on a Thursday, 3 times on a Friday or Saturday, that's 650 to 700 cars that are going to pull in to those 2 lots that otherwise would not be turning eastbound on Eggleston from Spring Road or using westbound Eggleston to reach the parking lots. That's a lot of cars if you think about that turnover. So it is a material change. The language, no impact on capacity is different than no impact on traffic. These are not generalized concerns that apply to the parking special use wherever it's going to be located. This is at this particular location, under these particular circumstances, with the parking spaces facing head into homes, the average setback being greater than what it's stated at 25 feet for the regulatory setback by staff. We strongly disagree with that. This is a special instance that is different than any one other entrance that has prevailed in Elmhurst, and your residents are relying on you to review this, understand the factors. I'm fully confident that if there's a denial by the city council of this project, there's no lawsuit that will succeed on the merits of challenging that denial. I want to thank you for your time. I know that there are other residents here. I am available for questions if you need to, but I submitted as much as I could in writing so you'd had it in front of you as you consider the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. I am going to see if the applicant wishes to make any final comments as well.
Thank you very much. The only thing I would like to correct is that Roberto's does not have a live entertainment conditional use. Never has, and they don't have one presently. Other than that, I have no comment.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. I would ask if anyone else has any comments. We're getting close to closing this public hearing. Usually we allow the applicant to have the final last words. And I'm going to ask if any commissioners have questions. Commissioner Burns.
Yes, I'd just like to ask a few questions based on tonight's presentation. Question for the applicant. You showed an option for the south parking lot for the east leg of the south parking lot. So is your application, is that what is now being proposed, or are you simply putting it forth for the commission to require as a condition of your conditional use that you adopt the option?
The optional plan is not the primary plan. The primary plan is exactly what we have submitted. The optional plan is one that takes into consideration some of the objections that were raised by the various neighbors in the neighborhood. We can accommodate those neighbors if they're going to be happy with the optional plan, but we'd be just as happy dealing with the original plan. The optional plan forces the Marisi family to undertake construction immediately, whereas the principal plan does not.
Thanks. I have a question for Mark Daniel. This has to do with the definition of structures. And so just so I understand clearly your perspective on this, you're saying that surface parking lot would be considered a structure because of it's composed in a certain manner and so forth. Would you say then that we would be required to consider any paved surface on a residentially zoned lot to be part of the structure for lot coverage purposes? And that would, what I'm thinking of are driveways, sidewalks, concrete patios, and the like.
There are different provisions in the ordinance that apply to some different structures. You know, I think if it's a concrete structure, I mentioned a membrane structure in relation to the Virgil case where the city asserted that the membrane structure, which didn't have a roof, would be part of the lot coverage ratio. When it comes to cement, a porch, a deck, recreational structure like a sport court, I've got one of those behind me. The city has drawn interpretations that don't necessarily fit that definition to allow things. Now, it's only going to come up in contested cases, but that definition of structure is broad. It is a broad definition. And in most cases, a surface parking lot is going to be defined as a structure. The Illinois courts have recognized a parking lot as a structure, and this definition is so broad as to include a surface parking lot. There's not an exclusion for it. There are also the light standards and the fences and everything that goes along with the surface parking lot that are also structures. The lights are a structure. Those are pretty tall. Those are in the front yard.
You mentioned the Illinois courts have defined surface parking lots as structures. And I believe in your recent submittal, you referred to a case. I forget.
It was Nuneman. In that case, there's a particular statute on the books that says that an adjoining landowner has the right to sue to enjoin the construction of a building or structure. And in that particular case, the court recognized the adjoining landowner's right to sue to prevent a parking lot from going forward, finding that it was a structure.
Okay, I was wondering, do you have the text? I mean, does the circuit court decision exist in a written form?
Oh, it's an appellate. Yeah, I can circulate that.
Right, I read the appellate, and I just wanted to clarify if you could point me specifically to where that appellate opinion says that parking lots are structures.
Well, it's the appellate court affirmed an injunction issued under the Adjoining Landowner Act. And that statute, 65 ILCS 5/11-13-15, authorized the injunction on the basis that someone was proceeding with the construction of a structure. A parking lot's not a building unless it's an indoor parking lot like what you have across from FFC. But structured parking aside, surface parking is a structure under that statute.
Right. The reason I asked for the clarification is I didn't see a reference in the appellate opinion to the Adjoining Owners Act. So I was just wondering where that was sourced from.
It was I can get it to Eileen, but it's shortly before the discussion of the covenants portion of the case.
Okay, thanks. Now I have a few questions for city staff and/or city attorney. First, regarding the setbacks. So the code says 25 feet is the minimum setback in an office or commercial district. And then for residential districts, it's 25 feet or more if 40% of the block's frontage is greater than 25 feet to the structures. As I understand it, there's nothing in the code right now that explicitly addresses the application we have before us, which would be a parking lot serving a commercial use, but on an R-zoned parcel. So my question is, would we, since the less restrictive view would be that it would just be a 25-foot setback, because that's the generic figure for residential. The more restrictive interpretation would be that it would have to be the average of the adjacent frontages to the extent that they're greater than 25 feet. When there's a situation like this where you can have you could have more restrictive or less restrictive interpretation, what has been our practice, or perhaps this is a question for city attorney, what is the legal standard?
So are you asking city attorney for this?
I'm not sure if there's anything in the ordinance that speaks to more or less restrictive interpretations, but I guess the city attorney could speak to it.
Okay, let's add city attorney. Do you have a comment on that?
Yes, there is nothing specific in the ordinance. It's just the practice of the city staff and how they've interpreted it.
So this principle of more or less restrictive interpretation doesn't come up?
Well, I think obviously it comes up on a number of occasions. The purpose of, unless it's restricted expressly, then the general proposition is that you need to allow it to occur. We want to encourage land use to be recognized within the city, and we don't want to be overly restrictive unless it's expressly restricted in the ordinance.
Okay, because I had the same sort of question about the 300-foot measurement. Since the ordinance doesn't say whether the 300 feet is to a main entrance, or even whether it's as the crow flies, or walking along streets or driving. So we would not apply this standard of adopting either the more restrictive or less restrictive interpretation.
My understanding is that we should allow the use to go forward so long as it's not expressly prohibited. So if in this instance, there's two parcels that have the lots that are supporting them. They're both within 300 feet.
Okay. Next question. So the paragraph that triggers this as a conditional use, according to the staff interpretation, 22.242A3 location A. And this is the one that talks about being within 300 feet. And if it's on a residentially zoned parcel, it has to comply with 22.26 for conditional use. But what I'm interested in is the beginning text of that section says that it's for any use erected or established after the effective date of the ordinance. So if the use is before the effective date, what does that mean?
I'm gonna, Commissioner Burns, I'm gonna ask that some of the questions relating to the attorney or city staff, that we use this opportunity, that we ask those in deliberation. Would that be okay with you? And do some time to question the folks here. Would that be okay with you to do that?
Sure.
Okay. Commissioner Callaway.
Thanks, Chair Rose. I have a couple of questions, and then I kind of had a sort of a point of order question. First of all, Mr. Day and we appreciate the photographs of the various thoughts on landscaping and fencing. I'll put my views on vinyl fencing, white vinyl fencing aside. But I guess, how do you address the issue of the residents' concerns that that the applicant isn't currently taking care of the back of its property? It isn't currently being a good neighbor. There's debris. There's been a number of comments and photos that have been shown to us, and we've seen this over and over again where landscaping goes up, but then it's not taken care of. So, it looks beautiful in the photos, but I guess, how do you alleviate the residents' concerns that that's just going to fall by the wayside, like the back of the property currently has?
Because it's a conditional use, the condition of the landscaping and the specific landscaping plan can be made a condition of the approval of the project, in which case there's an enforcement provision. Because of the way the law is written in the state of Illinois, the city itself can always enforce the code provisions, and you do through ordinance enforcement provisions on occasions. But where the city is not acting, private property owners within 1,200 feet of the particular site have the ability themselves to file a cause of action and go into court and seek enforcement of the landscaping and fencing plan. And if they are successful in court, they actually not only get the court to order that the landscaping and maintenance be undertaken, but they also get their attorney's fees paid.
Okay.
There's a dual enforcement provision, one that's held by the city and one that is held by the residents, and it can be made a condition of the approval of the conditional use.
Okay, but it would be up to the residents that if they feel like the landscaping or the fencing is fallen into repair, they need to somehow get the city involved in terms of enforcing that.
They don't have to. Actually, the statute in question is expressly providing a cause of action for residents where the city has failed to act. My experience in dealing with the city of Elmhurst is that you're rather active in code enforcement and that you're pretty good about code enforcement. Some cities are not. But this is a dual statute. The city always has the authority to enforce the conditions adopted with a conditional use approval. But if the city is failing to act, the residents have their own cause of action. Mark Daniel has filed those causes of action. He knows very well what I'm talking about.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking at my notes from our January 20th meeting, and I know we had some discussion about this, and I guess I'd like to hear from the applicant, at least for starters, if Mr. Daniel wants the opportunity to respond, I think that would be welcome as well. But we did talk, and I think Mr. Day, you said that that we, as part of granting, what's before us, can restrict the hours for the use of the parking lots. Do you recall saying that?
Yes.
Okay. And I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, because obviously one of the largest concerns here is the lighting and the use of those parking lots, late into the hours when the restaurant's still open.
The hours of operation, the regular hours, the applicant is asking to have the permission to close at midnight. That's when they close. They frequently have employees or staff that will stay past the closure hour of midnight. And they want to at least have enough flexibility after closure so that the employees can get their vehicles out of the lot. They definitely do not need access of the lot from 1 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning. They can be vacant during those hours in the entirety, but they are open 7 days a week.
Okay, but if the, and I still think there's an enforcement provision with this, because it really does require people to, follow posted signs. But from what I understand your comments, that if the commission felt that restricting those hours further, I understand what Roberto's is asking for, but if we felt that restricting those hours further, that was something that we could in fact include.
I think that the city has the authority to apply reasonable restrictions on the use of any conditional use. I do think that a factor, though, would be what are the hours of operation for the city's lot that's immediately adjacent to single family residential. And I think that would have something to do with the measurement of reasonable hours.
Okay, Mr. Daniel, do you have any response to that?
I would agree the city can regulate it. Certainly, under the circumstances, hours of operation are a difficult issue, and it again shows why this doesn't really work well at this location, because whatever the hours of operation are going to be, you're going to have a change in the lifestyle and experience of the people that live next to the parking lot, where they can't find peace of mind until, even if you say 10 o'clock, maybe they get it at 10, but their waking hours aren't going to be what they have been. So it's a difficult subject, but you can regulate the hours of operation via conditional use permit.
Okay. And then, and I'm not sure who to direct this to. And Eileen, please, I don't want this to be viewed as any kind of a backhanded remark, because we obviously, you guys have put a lot of time and effort into this case. In my 8+ years on the commission, I think this is probably the most complicated case that we've that I think we've encountered. But we find ourselves in a strange position here, because it's like dueling banjos. We have back and forth between the applicant's attorney and of course the resident's attorney, and going every time I check my email, there was a new something new going up on board docs. I guess part of where, and maybe Mr. Acker, you can weigh in here as well, but this is kind of an odd situation because we have the city planner kind of giving an opinion letter about some of the questions that, you know, have been raised and that are very clearly are central issues to this case, right? The applicant has one view, the resident's attorney has another view, and then we have our city planner weighing in as well, who of course is not giving a legal opinion. It's you know, some would argue probably the most valued opinion just because of Eileen's her breadth of experience with the city and in planning. But I guess you know, there's no question at the end of this, but I guess I'm wondering, is anybody else, you know, how do we resolve the fact that we've kind of got these, you know, three views, these three opinions on these core issues? I don't recall ever having that issue before. And specifically when we have, you know, we have the city planner providing the city's view, but it's not a legal opinion.
I could answer that, Commissioner. I have worked with Ms. Franz in developing these statements. So they're not just city planner legal opinions without a Juris Doctorate. Okay, so, you know, these are positions of the city. They are being done through the city staff. And, you know, my role here is really to assist the commission in getting through this process. As part of that, you know, I'm assisting city staff to make sure that they're prepared to answer your questions. So you can rest assured that whatever communications that Ms. Franz is giving you, that I have worked through with her, and I believe that they are correct legal statements as far as the city's position in this regard.
Okay, great. Thanks, Andrew.
Let me just say, I think it's not unusual where we have asked city staff to weigh in. We have a series of questions and we've asked them to weigh in on that. So that aspect, I think, is not as unusual. So.
Yeah, I just don't recall a situation as extensively on core issues to the case as this one.
That may be true. That may be true. Sure. Any other commissioner have questions at this point? Commissioner McCoy.
Thank you, Chair Rose. I have a question about enforcement and the issue of the traffic on Engleston. If the city was, because it's a conditional use, to require that access from the parking lots could never go east on Engleston, everyone would have to go out onto Spring Road. I just wonder, is that a possibility, or is that just not something that can be done? I mean, if everyone could only exit those two parking lots going like west on Engleston, there's no going east, that certainly would obviously cut down on the traffic. That was one question I had. The other one was when you said that the parking lot wouldn't be used like from, I think you said 10 in the morning till midnight. Well, what about the deliveries of food? What times would those deliveries be made?
Parking beforehand. Yeah, so I mean, sometimes the trucks, they start unloading, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock.
Okay.
Trucks will start unloading as early as 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning.
Thank you.
As they do now.
And in terms of the enforcement on the street, Commissioner?
Yes,
I think that you had a question about, the city has the police power over Engleston. It is a public municipal street. You can post it one way. You can close it to eastbound traffic. You can post directional signs that force the people leaving the commercial parking lot to use Spring Road as their arterial roadway. You control the signage and you control the traffic flow. So you do have authority to direct the traffic out of those parking lots to use Spring.
Thank you. That's all.
Commissioner Uditsky.
Just a quick follow-up on Commissioner McCoy's question. So how are deliveries currently made? Are they delivered through the back where the parking lot would be?
Applicant, you're muted.
I'm going to let Pasquale answer that.
Yeah,
Just a point of clarification, Chair Rose, just wanting to confirm that you were sworn in as well during the initial time.
Yeah.
Kiki,
I mean, I
if you
could
would,
swear in, yeah.
if you wouldn't mind.
Were you sworn in, Mr. Pasquale?
Not today, no.
Okay, you'll have to be sworn in. Kiki, could you please?
Sure, sure. Would you raise your right hand for me, please? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, yes. The deliveries that come in right now, they actually, you know, whether they're 18-wheelers or whatever they are, they're backing them into the alley right now and pulling straight back to unload the food. I don't think that they're actually going to be loading from the parking lot. They're still going to be coming into what they are now. So there won't be any change of deliveries.
So when you say the alley, are you referring to the area where the proposed parking lot would be, the proposed south parking lot?
Well, the parking lot is actually east of the alley.
I see what you're saying.
Commissioner, the alley remains a public alley. Unlike the alley on the north side of Eggleston, the alley on the south side remains a city-owned right-of-way. So that's not part of the parking lot.
And are there, I apologize, I'm just kind of looking at a, you know, at a overview Google map. So currently, is there any parking back there? Is it used for like employee parking or something?
I think the city has quantified the parking for Roberto's as 7 parking spaces, and they're all on the portion that is located west of the alley.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other commissioner have a question at this point? Commissioner Snyder.
Thank you. Yes, I want to just follow up on the revised design for the south parking lot. Has that been run by the residents? What's the response been?
We have posted that. To this point in time, the net residents have refused to meet with us. And they've told us that their attorney does not want them to meet with us.
So am I allowed to ask the question of the residents to respond to this design alternative for that southern parking lot?
It's certainly okay with the applicant.
If I may, Chairman?
Is City Attorney Acker, just a moment. City Attorney Acker, let me ask you, is that appropriate for the commissioner to ask the residents?
You know, at this point, I think it's a matter of style. You know, the applicant has given his blessing, and if Mr. Daniel is willing to engage in the participation of the response, I would suggest that occur. If he chooses not to, then it's not, you know, no harm, no foul.
Got it. Okay. So, Mr. Daniel, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, Chair Rose, the first time that we saw this alternative was with an email from Eileen that came in on Friday to me that let me know there was a new post late in the day. I was not aware of the modification. I was not aware of the new exhibits on fencing and landscaping. I will also go on record that I believe Mr. Day is speaking about a different attorney that was involved previously. I think as far as the residents are concerned, to the extent that they are attending here and want to speak about those landscape improvements or the fence or this right out issue off a public alley that affects other property owners, I suppose that's something they can speak about.
Okay. Commissioner Snyder?
Yes, and then if this alternative design were pursued for that south lot, would it entail submitting a revised application?
I believe it would. I mentioned and I'm sorry, is that still directed at me? I was thinking a conditional use would be necessary.
I think that's really directed to our city attorney.
I think that the proposal by the applicant is that it's an option. He clearly stated that the original plan was submitted as what they're seeking. So obviously, you know, unless he changes that, that's what we're proceeding under.
Okay, but I guess, I'm a little bit thrown then because they're presenting this option as part of this application, but yet we're saying that's not really what we're pursuing. And so I'm wondering how we would leave room to allow this alternative design to sort of be vetted and perhaps maybe pursued if it were something that the neighbors found more agreeable, and then there could be some sort of compromise to rise at. I'm just wondering how we can leave room for the development of this alternative since it has been presented as part of this application by the applicant. So
it would be my understanding, and I'm going to ask the city attorney to correct me if I'm wrong, that kind of negotiation would have to be between the applicant and the residents to come up with that. I would be reluctant for commissioners to attempt to broker that. That's just my thought. Maybe the city attorney has something different with that.
Well, I'm not proposing that we as a commission broker that deal, but just leave room and time for the applicant and the neighbors to work it out is what I'm proposing or asking.
Got it. We've seen this once before in Redeemer Lutheran. Okay, some commissioners remember who were there, and there was some concern about could we make this change and this change and this change. In the end, I think we have to base a decision on what is presented to us. And I think that unless the applicant changes that, they can put out whatever they want, but unless they change it, we need to make a decision based on that. That's my understanding, and I'm going to ask the city attorney to weigh in on that for me, please.
Yes, I agree, Chair Rose. I believe that it's the applicant who controls the submission, and the applicant indicated this evening that original submission is what they're proceeding under.
Okay, so if we go forward and just base our deliberation off of the original plan, original design, and it were not approved by the commission, could the applicant then come back with the revised design and resubmit their application and then go, how does that process work?
I'm going to ask Eileen Franz to please comment on that process. Thank you.
So if the circumstances were that the original proposal was not approved by the Zoning and Planning Commission and then ultimately not approved by the City Council, the applicant could come back and reapply with the new proposal. I would have to double check. We have something in our code that prohibits that for happening for a certain amount of time. I don't recall off the top of my head if that would apply to a conditional use permit. We have had circumstances though as well where an applicant has made a slight modification to a site plan during the public hearing process. This would still require a conditional use, but it is slightly different. It is different than what the applicant originally proposed. So I would want to take a closer look at it before I would say yes or no, this would need a full new public hearing at this point if the applicant chose to go forward with that instead.
Right, it really hinges on, and that would be the staff's call, whether this is a major change or whether this is a minor modification. So if they came in and said, look, we want to move that parking lot a little further south and a little further west, and this is going to change our landscaping plan, it would be city staff's determination, is that a major change that requires a reapplication or is that a minor modification? That's my understanding of it. So they could come with that, but that wouldn't require, if it was deemed that was not a major change, then it would not require a full reapplication. So, Commissioner, let me ask Commissioner Snyder, you're done with that? I'll go to Commissioner Burns then. Or
Yes,
Commissioner Say?
I mean,
Okay.
I'm asking these questions because of another case that we have where we've gone back to the applicant and discussed design revisions. So I
Yeah.
just want to make this process clear and make sure.
It hinges on that, the determination, is it major or is it a minor modification? Oftentimes major modifications would be moving buildings or just much more significant. And I'm not doing a very good job of explaining that, but to say it's really that difference. And it would be the professional staff's opinion to determine if that was major or minor. So.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for now.
Okay, sure. Commissioner Burns.
So I think also kind of aligned with that concept where it would be the applicant deciding to change something. We have had cases where we have imposed certain conditions. For example, to have a certain kind of fence facing Lake Street in one application, or how many pieces of equipment could be parked in front, or I don't know if it's the car wash where they're coming back, but I don't think it's going to be a whole new application, but just an adaptation. So I suppose, the question would be, could we do it that way? Could we say, we're the ones saying we want that alternative?
And I think that this would be appropriate discussion for deliberation. Absolutely, totally appropriate for deliberation. Any other commissioner has a question? Commissioner Uditsky.
Yeah, quick question. So, Mr. Day, one of the issues you raised was due to the lack of parking that most businesses were not sharing their parking. So would these parking lots be limited solely to Roberto's residents? Or would they be open to the general public?
They would not be open to the general public. They would be limited to the Maurici clients.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners? Okay, I'm going to then move. Commissioner Pittman, sorry, there you go.
No problem. Thanks, Chair Rose. My question is for the applicant. I wanted to follow up on a comment or question that Commissioner Callaway had asked regarding the back area of Roberto's. Visited the site numerous times and it certainly could use some TLC back there. I recognize at this point, you've got a house buffering it from the other house and, nobody's really back there but your employees. But now that that house could be removed if this moved forward and then you have patrons parking back there, it seems to me that it would be in Roberto's best interest to clean that up, not only for their own benefit, but to be a good neighbor. And I just wanted you to kind of respond to that and what the intentions are for the back of that area.
We received a code enforcement notification approximately 6 or 8 weeks ago. All of the cleanup items were completed.
Okay.
Other commissioners have questions. Commissioner Huffman.
Yes, thanks, Chair Rose. Maybe just a quick question regarding clarification on parking adequacy. And there seems to be some disagreement on the part of the applicant and in communication that Mr. Daniel had this evening. So going back to 2002 and 2006, this was looked at on multiple occasions, and it seems as if the conclusion was, based upon information that was sent out recently, that the city concluded that there was not adequate parking to support Roberto's during peak business hours. Is this, and I guess this is going to Mr. Day and maybe city staff, can you confirm that this is the case?
2002 report. And we also submitted a quotation from City Manager Tom Borcher that was at the same time that the original 2002 application was pending, where Tom Borchert acknowledged that at peak times, there's inadequate parking for Roberto's.
Yeah, I seem to recall the number 31 sticking out. And again, a question to Mr. Daniel, because you referenced the same report, but actually came to the conclusion that city staff stated that there was adequate parking. So where's the disconnect here?
I think the disconnect is in Mr. Warner's discussion of how you evaluate adequacy of parking. There are numbers of spaces, and then there's the issue of proximity of spaces. And at one point in the memorandum, Mr. Warner raises the issue of the perception that parking is inadequate, relies on the distance to the spaces. I think practical experience-wise, Mr. Borchert does address that issue district-wide, but in relation to Roberto's in particular, Mr. Warner addressed that as a perception based on proximity and not number.
Maybe just a quick follow-up question to that. Do we know if in 2002 and 2006 there were restrictions on the neighboring properties? Mr. Day in his presentation showed multiple examples of signage that's up at Algrim's, also up at Silverado and other businesses. Do we know if the parking was restricted at those businesses back when those studies were done in the past?
Is that to me, Commissioner? I think
I guess it's to whoever has
city,
knowledge on it.
Is that to city staff? I think
Sure.
I'm going to ask city staff to respond to that. And if they don't have that answer immediately, we'll ask them to get back with that information.
I mean, I can tell you by personal experience from Mr. Lanfear's law office north, including Algrim, including, I think Lazes is restricted. Most every parking lot is restricted as you move north, and it has been for quite some time. The only one that I know is shared is Silverado, and that's with the META operation. And I've been involved in that district for a while.
Thank you.
So again, just a quick follow-up, because those were spaces that were included in the study in 2002 and 2006. So if they're restricted use, how could they be included as spaces that are available to the Spring Business Road district?
Well, they are spaces that alleviate the demand on the street, which is what we point out in our letter this afternoon. Mr. Day in his correspondence said that those spaces can't be counted because they're private parking, but the reality is that where the greatest exceedance of parking is, for example, the apartments. A resident of those apartments has ample guest parking, so they don't use the street parking. Someone drives over, they walk down the street and grab a bite. Silverado has ample off-street parking so that they don't have to rely on street parking. And that frees up more of the public parking in the area for other users that include Roberto's, among others, you know, the salon, the bar, the bike shop that used to be there, whatever it may be, but it does free up that public parking.
So is the contention that the street parking that essentially runs from Valette to St. Charles, which is the entire Spring Business Road district, is parking that potentially can support Roberto's?
Well, the parking that supports Roberto's now practically and reasonably is from Prairie Path Lane north. That's what's happening now. Folks walk from the bank parking lot to Roberto's. They walk from Prairie Path Lane to Roberto's. I've parked on Prairie Path Lane to go to Roberto's. I mean, practically speaking, that is the demand radius for parking. If you go behind the city, the west buildings on Spring, the city parking lot is there, but some people prefer that walk from the south. That's what happens. Employees park to the south.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to ask who am I not seeing, Commissioner Burns? From commissioners, I just said from commissioners, I'm sorry, not from the. just about to open that up. That was my next statement. There were several folks who raised their hands and wanted to give some additional public testimony. I want to make sure all of those people who did that they have been sworn in. If anyone doesn't, they need to let me know. And then after this, I would encourage you to, if a lot of people want to speak, to think about that. And then by really procedure, we would let the applicant then have a final say before we end. So let me ask Mr. Eisenmenger, it sounds like you wanted to, were you sworn in?
Yes, I was. Thank you, Chair. And thank you again to all the commissioners and everybody involved. This is a case that means a lot to the residents here. So I thank you for your time and your careful consideration. There was something that got mentioned tonight that really just sort of fired me up, I will say. It was alleged that I had a conversation with Pasquale about fences and the specific of what I prefer. I just want to be really clear, that conversation has never happened. Before you guys go into deliberation, I want to make very specific, that is very specific that hasn't happened. And the only proposals that we've seen are things that have been posted to board docs. Also, there is some question on, a lot of the questions didn't seem to be addressed. Talking to other people that have asked some questions. Again, we just got to see another presentation from Scott Day of why this would be a good idea. But there was a ledge of lost business due to having to turn customers away. And one of my questions was proof of lost business and as a cause of this. So nothing was submitted on that from a financial standpoint. Also, building, I asked about how many buildings the Marici family owned and what parking spaces are for those particular businesses or those buildings. If there is such a need that maybe they could potentially use those in the off-peak hours. So those are two things that I wanted to bring up, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask if anyone else wishes to make public comment. Deborah Orth.
Yes,
and I believe you were sworn in, Ms. Orth, right?
Yes. I don't know if you heard me. The dog heard me say I do, but I don't know if you guys heard me.
Well, that's all that's important, right? There you go.
And I do thank you for your time and efforts in this. I know that it's some of you have been doing this a lot before. For some of us, it's a little bit more new. But I did just kind of want to go on the record in the April 16th, 2021 Scott Day's memo, page 7 of 42 pages. I was called up by name and believe I was mischaracterized in my testimony. So I just wanted to mention that I did say I had a distrust based on how the information was presented by the petitioner and the petitioner's experts and the conflicting information with the petitioner's website. One of the experts for the petitioner said twice that Roberto's was not a quote unquote white tablecloth dining establishment, but the website self-described itself as such, as white tablecloth. So I was seeking clarity on the classifications used in those descriptions, as well as the high turnover classification and what that means, and asked what other classifications there were to better understand the testimony that was given by the petitioner, which seemed in conflict with how the petitioner represented themselves online. The point was seeking clarification. I wasn't asserting what the classification should be. I was trying to understand the petitioner's position. And so I will add that mischaracterizing me hasn't done anything to alleviate my sense of distrust. But I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, because it seems to me that there's been other representations tonight that other people have brought up that aren't accurate. So I just hope that you guys are all able to decipher through all of that, because there's a lot of information out here. I also do have a question about the fact that the petitioner keeps bringing up the fact that there's been 4 evenings of time invested in this, but at no time in those 4 evenings have I heard one person from the neighborhood support this change, the conditional use permit. There may be a letter that was uploaded to the docs, but it is just a letter. No one that was sworn in stated what was in that letter at any of these meetings. And so you know, there's a lot of us here who are concerned and may even be objecting, and you are asking for us to give a lifetime with parking lots. And, you know, I don't think that that's a much greater burden than the 4 evenings that we've been asked to invest in this process to give it what it needs to for all the neighbors. So I hope that you're able to, like I said, take all this information in and make good sense of it, because the neighbors are telling you it doesn't fit and it's zoned as a neighborhood, and they knew what size the neighborhood was when they had decided to put their business there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Orth. Okay, is there anyone else in the public who wishes to give testimony at this point? Gwen, let me make sure, were you sworn in?
I was not sworn in this evening. I'm
You
sorry, I
need
was
to
at a
be sworn
PTA
in.
meeting.
You need to be sworn in. I'm going to ask the court reporter, I want you to raise your right hand and have the court reporter please swear you in.
Okay, thank you.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
So again, I want to thank everyone for their time. I am actually the Eisenmanger that had the conversation with Pasquale. And so I just wanted to clarify what I said in regards to what would be appropriate. And I asked Pasquale to put himself in our shoes, to think about if this proposal was next to his home, what standard or what would be acceptable to him, and have that be the starting place to.
Oh no, we lost her. Apparently something occurred to her internet. Sorry that happened. Okay, here she is.
I'm sorry, Chair Rhodes, my iPad just died, so I hopped into the other room.
Okay, there you go.
So
Continue on.
I don't know where I cut off, but what I said was, you know, if this proposal was near his home or next to his home, to think about what he would want, what would be acceptable to him, and have that be the starting place. Don't have the city's recommendation be the minimum expectation that he thinks would be good. To think about what would he want to protect his home? What would he want to see outside his windows? And to start there when talking to us about what would be something we would want next to our home. You know, obviously we don't want cars pointing right at our home. But to think that the minimum expectation of the city would be acceptable, it breaks my heart that any applicant in our city would find that would be something neighbors would want, especially when you have little kids running around up and down the streets and knowing that you have a liquor license, you have late hours of operation. So I just wanted to clarify exactly the conversation that Pasquale and I did have, because I wanted to make sure that we were setting the bar at a high level, not the minimum. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. That's very helpful. Is there anyone else who wishes to make public testimony at this point? Ms. Malik Novak, please. Were you sworn in, Ms. Novak?
I was.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
I too, like Deborah Orth, I feel that I was misrepresented and misquoted in the 42-page document by attorney Scott Day. I believe it's page 7. He quoted me as saying that I was concerned about people jumping the ramp and entering the yard, which I do have my concerns. And while that technically would be one of them, I never actually said that. But honestly, it jolted my memory. I have jumped a curb. I have gone into a building myself. I was a frequent customer of Dominic's and I was a new driver. And you can ask my brother and my parents. I was in I don't know, my husband remembers, but it was a 2000 something Toyota 2-door, my brother's silver car, Solera. And I did jump the 6-inch curb and I did hit Dominic's, which is now the Whole Foods. And so it is quite possible and it is a danger. Luckily, there's no one injured, no one hurt. There was no police report. You can maybe go find a junkyard where the car is and see the damage that was done to that bumper. I also have some questions regarding security in the parking lot. I don't believe out of the 42-page document that I saw anything about regards to security. I know with other previous conditional use lots, I believe it's the EECC lot. I've done a lot of investigation into that. There's a gate that allows certain, I think it's employees to use the lot. I'm not sure if that's exactly in the plans or not at this point for that lot, but I would like the applicant to possibly respond on what the security measures will be, because I worry about crime and how an additional 2 parking lots in a small residential neighborhood is going to impact crime.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the public who wishes to give testimony at this point? Is that Rita? Is that Rita
Yes.
with Rita's iPad? Rita,
Yes,
I know that were you sworn in?
I was sworn in.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Okay, I just have a couple of comments because Mr. Day did mention that I live off the city lot. And, I do want to reiterate that, he's talking about the home values and, remaining the same. But I do fear for the people on the other side. And without, having any flood mitigation, I mean, there's code compliant. And, I could show you a picture of my yard. And if the city is code compliant, well, then, so I think that there needs to be something said about these code compliant terms that they are using, because flood mitigation, there is just, there's a difference between the two. And I'm going to hold up a picture. I don't know if everybody will be able to see it, but that is my yard. And these are not 100-year floods. These are every year. That was twice last year. That is my yard off that lot. I would encourage all of you, all you commissioners, take a ride down the alley, go behind the houses, look at the fencing. I mean, and my neighbor even has all alongside his property a barrier, and a truck still hit it. So his side fence is gone. So really, I do want you to consider everything that these residents have said. I'm living it. So I hope that you all had a good look at that picture, because it's shocking. Every single year since 2013, that's what happens to my yard. So there's no more 100-year flood. It's every year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to give public testimony? Okay. I'm not seeing anyone else at this point. I'm going to do a broad-based survey.
I would. I'm Mike Novak, and I have not been sworn in yet.
Mike Novak. All right, Mike. I'm going to ask the court reporter to please swear you in.
Would you raise your right hand for me, please?
I'm raising.
Okay, because I can't see him.
I'm raising my right hand, but I assure you.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony about to give in this cause to be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Mr.
Okay.
Novak.
Yeah, so I just have two quick comments here. First is a kind of reiteration of what my wife had mentioned about the mischaracterization of us being scared about somebody jumping the curb. I know it seems like a fear-mongering point there, but we have lost a child. And the idea of having cars park mere feet from our child playing in her grandparents' yard, that's just not a risk that we ever thought we would have to consider, let alone take. So that's something that really kind of bothers me, the way that we were characterized there. I think it was incorrect and trying to make us look like something that we're not here. Second of all, on the 7 parking spots that Roberto's has, I'm just curious if that includes the spots in front of Roberto's on Spring Road, the ones that have signs saying, I think it's a 10-minute limit. And if it was not including those, why not? Because there's no other business on that strip there that has anything that would require a 10-minute limit. So, why did the city decide that those spots belong to Roberto's? And if they did not decide and Roberto's put up those signs themselves, why were they allowed to? And then a continuation of that they had mentioned, Mr. Day had mentioned that all of the private businesses have signs saying, this is for that specific business only. Let's point out that the Marisi family owns what used to be the bike shop. They own what used to be the bank, and they also own the building at Leza. So half of those parking lots that say for that business only, the parking lots and businesses or buildings are owned by the Marisi family already. I think that needs to be pointed out when they say that Roberto's customers can't park there. They can't park there because the Marisi family doesn't want them to. That's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Novak. And before I go on, I want to express my absolute sympathy to you for having lost a child. That's a very tough thing. So I'm very, very sorry to hear that. Very sorry. Let me ask if there is anyone else Mr. Blair, feel free.
Thank you.
I know you were sworn in. So.
No, Chair Rose. In fact, I didn't raise my hand and get sworn in because
then you're
I
going to
intend to comment.
Okay, then you're going to have, is there anyone else? Really? Okay, I'll let the court reporter please swear you in.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony about to give in this cause to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I so do.
Thank you.
So I hadn't intended to comment. I've sent 2 letters in that really incorporated most of my thoughts on this, and really just wanted again to listen and get more background. But there are a few things I wanted to cover. When I was in Oak Park for 40-some years, I was on a committee that met monthly, part of the township. I have to say that I'm very impressed with this committee and particularly with your leadership. I think it's been very professional, even though I don't believe any of you are paid for your work, and I do appreciate it.
You're correct.
And I'm not trying to butter you up. It's an observation. Moving in here, we've been here not quite a year. We are in the westernmost building right next to the proposed lot in our townhome association. I didn't understand a lot of the emotion that came spilling out when this issue came up. And I think I have some better understanding of it now and some better understanding of all the issues, the complexity of the ownership, of whether any structure can be built on that mound, et cetera. And so I feel better able to comment on it. I understand more the emotion because it just does seem like there has not been outreach. I never said to anyone that I wouldn't meet with people, with Mr. Day, with any of the Marisis. I'm not quite sure where that came from. We did have one meeting with them at our request. This was a group of people. This was not really the Elmhurst Neighbors United at that point in time. And I heard his presentation, and then we marched on over to the City Hall and met the first time in January. I do want to comment that he said all of the code compliance issues were taken care of. They were taken care of in the time frame after this request on their part was running into a lot of opposition. I hear from the neighbors that when those issues have been brought up before, they didn't get any compliance. Now, I made a statement the last time I spoke to you about the lights being extremely bright over there. Those have been changed, and I assume that's part of the correction that he was referring to. So I'm not going to try and read a book outside my front door anymore by those lights. They have been toned down, and they aren't on all day as they used to be. So that's a good thing that's come out of these meetings, I think. I think the communication from Roberto's, I'll just say Roberto's et al. Has not been good. And it could have been handled very much better had there been an attempt to make, as the city plan suggests, a shared effort at a mixed use that is pulling in the interests of the community members, the residents, with the business. That has been done at other times, and I think had there been an interest in that, there would have been interested partners in the residents. I think, well, I already said I thought it was disingenuous to suggest we didn't want to meet or talk. The last thing I wanted to mention is there has been discussion at prior meetings, at least one meeting, about the contents of the mound and some testing to determine what's in there. There's great concern about whether there could be residual asbestos or some other stuff in there. And the last time I spoke, I think I said, I don't want anybody messing with that until we find out what's in there. I've heard nothing tonight from the applicant or anyone else about whether that issue's been put to bed. I don't think it has. And I suggest that that needs to be looked into before any work gets done over there. The last thing I want to say is I spoke with a friend who's in charge of construction and maintenance at the University of Chicago, very well credentialed. I said, is a parking lot a structure? And he said, of course it is. It was said tonight that the construction of the parking lot would be proceeded with. And how do you construct a non-structure? I just don't quite understand that. Those are my comments. Thank you. Oh, did you want to say? Yes. Sarah wants to.
I would also like to say something.
And I'm going to ask you, were you sworn in?
I was sworn in.
Plan ahead, Mrs. Blair. Go right ahead.
As my husband just referenced, we moved here about 9 months ago. And at that time, we had no knowledge of this possibility. And just as I've listened over the last few months, listening to things like that, I've come to appreciate many things. Recently, well, in the last few months, our 3-year-old and our 5-year-old grandchildren have moved in with us temporarily. And I've really come to appreciate how close we are to this possible parking lot and the safety issues that it is going to cause for the children of the neighborhood. I personally had not been thinking about that in those lines, but now as I look out my window and I realize that it could be 10 feet away from my front door and our children running out there, I personally do not trust the drivers that are whipping in and out of the back of Roberto's right now with their deliveries and their pizza delivery guys and that, who come down our street in a very rapid manner and make that turn, quite frankly, without really even looking. And as I've been walking them to school, I've really been thinking about this and the safety of our children on the block. And like I said, having this 10 feet away from our front door is very scary to me. And that's all I want to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It looks like Ms. Sienko does, you have your hand up. Did you wish to make public comment?
Yes, I would at this time.
Were you sworn in, Mr. Sienko?
I was not. I apologize. Right hand up.
Okay, I'm going to ask the court reporter to please swear you in.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Sienko.
My question for the commission and for the applicant is, has the elevations of the lots been clarified as for water runoff, as well as with the curbing, which was discussed this afternoon? How does that deal with water issues? The plot to the north of Engleston is a depression that contains water with actually relatively light rains, and when that's filled with when that's filled with a parking surface, that rainwater would be it would have to go somewhere, and I would assume that would just roll down elevation to the next resident's house. So I can't understand how filling in a depression is something that retains water. If there's a way the applicant could explain that, that would be marvelous, because I simply can't get my head around how that lot right now, being a depression, being something that holds, that's almost a retention pond, so to speak. When it becomes the parking lot, that's all that water is going to be bothering is going to be going into someone else's neighborhood, someone else's backyards. And that's really all I need to say right there to make sure that that's clear with the commission. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm aware the time is 11 minutes to 10. So seeing no one else wanting to give public testimony at this point.
Chair Rose? Chair
Yes.
Rose, we have one more person in the room here that wants to speak.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. I was just about to do the rounds to ask that. Okay. And they are in that room? Okay.
Just state your name. And
Chair Rose, I'm Mike Kusich. I'm the property manager for the Wild Meadows Trace.
We've heard you before. You have been with us before. Great. Welcome again.
Have. And I have been sworn in this evening. And I just wanted to reinforce a comment that Ken Blair, Dr. Blair and Sarah made, that we haven't really had any dialogue with Roberto's. And I represent 13 homeowners in the Wild Meadows Trace. We've had one meeting that we requested with Roberto's, with Scott Day, Attorney Day, and Pasquale. And that meeting consisted of them presenting Mr. Day's presentation that he made later that evening to the commission here. We didn't really have any exchange of ideas, and there has never been an exchange of ideas or any kind of working together to solve the problems that we see as a community with this development close to us. And I think Dr. Blair brought that up in his conversation. I just wanted to reinforce that. That's all.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, at this point, I will close the public public comment section. And I'm going to ask if the applicant is not obligated to answer any questions, but if they want to make any final comments, I'm going to ask them if they would like to do that. You're muted, so you'll need to unmute.
Speak to anybody. And that was published, right? Yes. Are we on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Couple of comments. First of all, there were a number of people that suggested that we mischaracterized their testimony. For that reason, in our written submittal, we included the page in the transcript, and so that you can check for yourself as to whether or not our characterizations are accurate. We think that they were. We certainly made an effort to make them accurate. Mr. Senko asked, why would we be permitted to fill a depression? We're not. That's the problem. Is this entire area is under 2 feet of water. It is a flood problem. It is antiquated engineering that predates the county code. It predates the city code. It predates the city regulations. And you had conveyance apparatus that are not capable of handling the stormwater that falls in the area. So it simply backs up and it sits there and it floods everybody's property. Because it's underwater, we can't fill the site. That's why we can't build a building on it. We cannot build a building on the site because we can't fill it. We cannot fill a depressional area. We have to make sure that however much stormwater is stored on this parcel of property in a 100-year storm event is maintained after we construct our facility. And on top of it, we have to provide storage under the code for our stormwater. We think that we are going to be the only parcel of property in the entire triangle formed by Spring Road, the Prairie Path, and the railroad that has stormwater storage at this location. We'll be the very first one. So we will be the only one complying with the current codes of the city. And we can't fill the site, which is why we can't build a house. The only thing that can be built on this parcel is a parking lot. And a parking lot is permitted on this particular location because you can have it below the base flood elevation by an unlimited depth. That's the only reason, it's the only viable use of this parcel. There was a question from Mr. Eisenmonger regarding who it is that, he never talked to us. It was Mrs. Eisenmonger that spoke with Pasquale and specified the 8-foot fence. With respect to the reach out to the association, I'm very sorry that Mike and I'm very sorry that Dr. Blair feel as though that was ignored. It was not. We have detailed at length in our written submittal the efforts that we tried to reach out to the association and all of the property owners in the particular area. I know that you felt that you were left out of that process, but we were told by the Dungan family that we were to speak to an attorney. All of our communication went through that attorney. All of the efforts are documented in our written submittal. And as an attorney, when I'm told to speak to their attorney, that's exactly what I do. So if there was a lack of communication, we understand that. But when we met in January, Dr. Blair, I asked you specifically for your survey. It's never been provided. I asked the manager for the association to provide us with survey information and show us exactly how they're conducting maintenance in order to get around your unit and utilize the Marisi property. I haven't been provided that. So there have been reach outs and efforts to try to communicate with the neighbors in the area that have not been met. It's been a two-way street. We welcome the opportunity to talk to you, and we hope that you will look at the alternative site plan. If that's something that will serve your interest and further protect your goals, we'd like to hear from you as it relates to that. That's why it was submitted, so that you can have an opportunity to look at it. There was a question as to whether or not we're going to provide written financials over the course of some defined period of time to establish each of the events that we lost because of our lack of parking. We're not going to do that. We have submitted sites that show our documentation that show all the various properties that are owned by the Marisi family. We've shown all of the various parking lots that are related to those particular structures and where they're located. The pins are in the documentation that we submitted to the city. We have tried desperately to meet with these neighbors. The discussion hasn't been about fencing, landscaping, lighting, or any of the items that we held out for the neighbors. That has not been the discussion. The discussion has been that it doesn't belong at this location. And that's a binary question. If they're going to present a binary question to the Plan Commission, we can't alter that. They've elected to do that. We would like to discuss with them fencing, landscaping, and lighting, but we've been denied the opportunity to do that despite repeated efforts and outreach. At this stage, we'd be more than happy to answer any additional questions you have or ask that the public hearing be closed.
Okay, we have 4 minutes, so I will not entertain any further questions at this point. Except I have one, and I'm gonna ask it, and Commissioner Callaway, I think, will support me in this. Are you really committed to a white plastic fence?
That's our proposal because it's consistent with what has been placed in the neighborhood, but ultimately, the configuration of fencing, the configuration of landscaping, the configuration of lighting, the configuration of the pavement, even the shape of the parking lot. This is not a planned unit development. Major and minor modifications aren't in play. It's a parking lot. You get to tell us exactly what it's going to look like in the shape, the landscaping, the fencing. You have the authority as a conditional use to make reasonable conditions on all of those.
Gosh, this will be one of the first times I can say I really don't like a white I can be opposed publicly to a white plastic
they're
fence.
all over Spring Road. That's why they're included.
That doesn't fly with me that they're all over. So, okay. I think at this point we're going to close this public hearing. We obviously are not deliberating tonight. There's a lot of information for us to look at. So there's been a lot of information that has just been submitted in the last 3 or 4 days for us to really look at. So we will not be deliberating this case tonight. We have 2 minutes, so clearly we're not. So I'm going to ask Eileen, when is the next date we can schedule, and we would begin deliberation at that point?
Give me just a second. May 18th.
May 18th. Okay. We will then close the public hearing right now. And we will then regather on May 18th. I encourage everybody at that point to please, Eileen, you had another comment you wanted to make?
Just one brief comment. I just want to make note while the public hearing is still open. I did receive a few emails this evening from Rab and Gwen Eisenmonger. A couple of those include some photographs. So I'm going to make sure that those get included on board docs tomorrow. Everything that I received through the end of the meeting tonight will get added to board docs. But once the public hearing is closed, we don't add any additional case information to the case record once the public hearing is closed. But the information that we received in the planning info email tonight will be added.
Excellent. And I will do one last thing, which is to make sure, have you received any emails up until this very moment that that anyone wants to make a public comment?
I was just going to try and submit what I did say, but I can't type the email address fast enough. So if you let me send that, I'd be happy to send it.
Send it right now.
Yep, that's fine. That's fine.
Right, well,
if you want to just send it to planninginfo@elmhurst.org.
Thank you.
And then I would just ask Emily to check my voicemail and make sure we don't have anything.
Emily, can you? Okay.
There are no voicemails.
Excellent. Okay. Then the public hearing is closed. Ms. Orth, did you get your email sent? Not yet. We'll take it. We will take that. So, okay. The public hearing is closed. We will all convene. What I want to make sure everyone understands then, when we deliberate, we certainly hope, folks come and listen, but we will not be soliciting any further public testimony at that point. We may have questions to ask the applicant or questions to ask somebody, but really the time for that has passed. I appreciate all of you coming in. Seriously, it's a long process. I once said, I think to Attorney Scott Day, your time is not our time. And it's true because we take a significant amount of time to think about this. And if you think 4 sessions is a long time to talk about one case, there have been cases where it's certainly been more than that. But I really appreciate that all of you have come out consistently and come out and stayed the whole time and listened to all of this. So I encourage you to come and listen to the deliberations. And again, keep in mind, this is stage 1 of a 3-stage process. It will be our responsibility for the commission to make a recommendation to the Development Planning and Zoning Committee. They will reconsider it. We must consider this case based on specific criteria about land use. That's primarily what we do. Other broader questions around public policy, those really will be considered at the Development Planning and Zoning Committee level. And then they will make a recommendation to the full city council, who has final decision-making power over this. So we're going to make a recommendation. Development Planning and Zoning Committee will make a recommendation to the full city council, but it's 14 city council members who will make the final decision. So thank you so much for all of you for being here and giving your voice so that we get to hear it all. We really appreciate that. Okay, thus ends that public hearing. Next item of business is to ask if there's any other business. Eileen, is there any other business we need to consider?
Sorry. Our May 4th meeting has a really heavy agenda. So I'm anticipating that we may not be able to get through everything that night, but as of right now, only deliberation for this case would be scheduled for May 18th. So we may have some additional case deliberation on May 18th. I'll talk to Chair Rose and we'll try and figure out the upcoming schedule. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you very much. Seeing no other business, I would ask for a motion and a second to adjourn. Commissioner Callaway moves, and a second, Commissioner Pittman. All right, Eileen, can you please call the roll?
Commissioner Callaway.
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman.
Yes.
Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Garland.
Yes.
Commissioner Hoffman.
Yes.
Commissioner McCoy.
Yes. Yes.
Commissioner Snyder.
Yes.
Commissioner Uditsky.
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes, and I want to thank all the commissioner members as well for your attention and your attention to detail and sticking with all of this. That's great. We are adjourned.
Good night.